I'd like to call this special meeting to order. To access translation of the agenda, click the top of the web page using the word English for translation into multiple languages. Meeting interpretation services are available via Zoom by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. This meeting will provide public comment opportunities on agenda and non-agenda items through the Zoom app and by telephone. We have changed the public comment format, which will now occur at the beginning of the meeting. Public comment will last for 1 hour and includes any agendized item or non-agendized item within the jurisdiction of the district. The time allotted for each speaker has also been extended to 2 minutes. If you are attending the meeting in person, you will need to submit a request to address the board form to indicate your desire to speak on an agenda item. If participating via Zoom, you will need to raise your hand by clicking on the appropriate icon or by pressing *9 if accessing the meeting by phone. In order to be recognized to speak on Zoom, your hand must be raised before public. Trustee Christian will now lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Trustee Christian. Trustee Reckler, would you do the land acknowledgement for us?
Thank you. We recognize that we are presently on the lands of the Chochenyo, Muwekma, Karkin, Ohlone peoples and acknowledge them as the first inhabitants of the land we currently occupy.
Thank you. Dr. Hurst, can we have the roll call, please?
Absolutely. President Phillips,
Here.
Trustee Clerk Smith Foltz,
Good evening, everyone. Present.
Trustee Reckler,
Good evening, present.
Trustee Gonzalez Hoy, is not here. Trustee Christian,
Good evening, President.
all is present and accounted for with the exception of Trustee Gonzalez Hoy, and he did share with me that he is absent today due to work obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We're going to go to item A6, disclosure of items to be discussed in closed session. This evening, we have 2 items. One is student discipline, the other is public employee appointment. Do we have any public comment on either of these closed session items?
No public comment at the time.
Okay, seeing that there is no comment at this time, we are going to recess into closed session. And we will be back out at 6:30 for the remainder of open session. Thank you. We are now coming back to open session. To access translation of the agenda, click the top of the web page using the word English for translation into multiple languages. Meeting interpretation services are available via Zoom by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. I would like to welcome everyone to this special meeting of the Board of Education. Today, we are having a study session on school safety, including social, emotional, and physical safety. The mission of the West Contra Costa Unified School District is to prepare students for post-secondary education and to be responsible, thinking, contributing members of our global society. We believe in public education as the most important function in a democratic society. We believe we must treat everyone with courtesy, dignity, and respect, provide safe and nurturing environments in which to learn, teach, work, and participate, serve our students by working as partners with our community to develop well-rounded, lifelong learners and contributing members of a global society. Take responsibility for our behavior and performance to ensure the highest possible achievement of all students, employees, and our school community. Provide equitable and essential communication and support for successful learning, teaching, working, and participating. Respect, celebrate, and welcome the diversity, uniqueness, and contributions of all members of our school community. The board member should not subordinate the education of children and youth to any partisan principle, group interest, or the member's own personal interests. This meeting will provide public comment opportunities on agenda and non-agenda items in person, through the Zoom app, and by telephone. We have changed the public comment format, which will now occur at the beginning of the meeting. Public comment will last for 1 hour and includes any agendized item. The time allotted for each speaker has also been extended to 2 minutes. If you are attending the meeting in person, you will need to submit a request to address the board form to indicate your desire to speak on an agenda item. If participating via Zoom, you will need to raise your hand by clicking on the appropriate icon in the Zoom app or by pressing *9 if accessing the meeting by phone. In order to be recognized to speak on Zoom, your hand must be raised before public comment begins. Due to the Brown Act, board members cannot discuss items that are not on the agenda and do not usually respond to items presented in public comment. Order of business may be changed without notice. The public is invited to attend and participate in all WCCUSD Board of Education meetings. Dr. Hirsch, do we have a report out of closed session?
Yes, we do. We would like to report out that the board approved 4-0 with Trustee Gonzalez-Hoy, of course, not being here. Approved the Director of Labor Relations, District Negotiator to be Conrad Tanischek. Thank you. We also want to report out that the board engaged in conversation about 2 expulsions, 2 stipulated expulsions, and those both were approved by the board as well, 4-0.
We are now about to begin public comment. Again, public comment is for any item that's on the agenda and any other item that is within the jurisdiction of the school district. even if it is not on the agenda. So it's kind of a free-for-all. We have 1 hour and we're going to begin. If you are in the building and you want to do public comment, you need to turn in one of these orange cards to staff. If you are in the Zoom and you want to do public comment, please raise your hand. Once public comment starts, if you are not in the queue, you will not be called on. So please, if you are in the Zoom, start raising your hand. There are only 6 hands up right now. Now there's 7. I'm gonna wait a little bit. Raise your hand if you want to comment. There's 12 folks in the Zoom who want to comment. All right. Going once. Going twice. Gone. Theresa Hardy. George Brown, you slipped in there. That's one of our CSOs. Love to see you, George. All right. So George Brown is last. And Theresa Hardy is second to last. And we're going to begin with the individual for public comment who is here today. And it looks like, and excuse me if I say this incorrectly, Taufik Fayed. Okay, so you're going to go to this microphone right in the front, and that's where you're going to address the board from, sir. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you guys for your time today. My name is Taufik Fayed. I'm a parent of a student within the district, and I'm concerned about the violence that's happening within the district. When I looked at the district's code of conduct, the first student right is for the child to be safe. And it says, we need to guarantee that students have the best environment conducive to learning. I believe this district is failing at that. You're failing to allow them to have the rights that you've laid out before them. I feel that we are too focused on being their buddy, being their friend, and giving excuses for all these issues that are happening, as opposed to being administrators, leaders, instructors, teachers. I've had conversations with the principal of the school that my child attends. He says the parents are supportive. And I will be the first person to say to everybody in this room and listening on Zoom, accountability starts at home. It always starts at home. It starts with the parents. It starts with conversations with the children. According to the principal, that he's had a lot of support from the parents, keeping their kids accountable. I want this district to be accountable to that as well. I expect accountability from the district, from the schools, from the administration, and from the board. I feel that my child's education is being hindered by violence, threats of violence. In all my years living in this area, I've never heard of so many fights happening at a school in this amount of time. And I feel like we're making excuses for the people who are doing this. We want to give them benefit of the doubt. We want to assume positive intent, but it is not helping the situation. I read throughout the agenda, the goal is to decrease violence by 20%. 20% is not enough. On average, we're averaging what, 800 acts of violence a year, and you want to lower it to 600? Still too many. Everybody knows by the time they enter school that laying their hands on another person is wrong. You don't need to be in middle school or high school to understand that. And I know there's a zero tolerance policy. However, if this is not addressed, please be aware that my child has been trained and has my full support and blessing to defend themselves if needed. Everything's escalating. It is not getting better. I would like to see accountability of the students, of the staff, of the administrators, and of the elected officials who swore that they would take care of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, sir. We're now going to go to public comment in the Zoom. And again, George Brown is the last person in the Zoom.
Our first public speaker for tonight is Jeffrey Bean. Please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the public. I am Jeffrey Bean. I am a 5th grade teacher at Shannon Elementary in Pinole. And I already spoke to a district staff member about this concern, and I want to raise it to the board as well. About 2 weeks ago, I received an email about a new assessment that will be given to 3rd through 6th grade students starting starting last week. And it is an ELA assessment that is aligned to the Lucy Calkins curriculum that we have. And I am concerned that the administration of this test suggests a disconnect between the upper administrators downtown and the needs of students at this time. Be aware that my 5th grade students are back in a classroom for the first time for many of them in a year and a half. Many of these students were last in school when they were in 3rd grade. Same with 3rd graders. Many 3rd graders at our school have not been in a real classroom since they were 1st graders. I am concerned that the test plan that the district has proposed and that's being asked of teachers is not appropriate for students at this point in the school year. I encourage the administration to rethink this, postpone the test until the spring, and check in with lots of teachers about what is appropriate for students at this point in the school year. Thank you for your time.
Next public speaker is Sandra Mulhern. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening. I'm a parent of 2 students at Valley View Elementary, and I'm here tonight to inform you of events that have happened at Valley View over the past week and a half. I've already reached out to staff, administration, and the superintendent, but nothing has changed as of yet. The incidents keep happening. A 2nd grade student at Valley View is in some sort of crisis. He caused a partial lockdown on Monday, October 4th during lunch recess. He hit several students and staff. There were additional events throughout the week with the student hitting the principal and staff. Yesterday, the student hit at least 8 children during lunch recess, kicked a staff member and the principal. Today, he caused the evacuation of his classroom. Parents have repeatedly reached out to the administration for help, but our school is short-staffed and one child is taking all of the resources. This is stressing all the students.
I'm sorry. I'm going to cut in, and I know at the risk of being accused of being rude, but I don't think it's appropriate to talk about an individual student in public comment. So if you can please follow up directly with the superintendent. I know that he's been very busy recently. So if he hasn't reached out, I'm sure that he will, but we can't talk about individual students in public comment. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is Kim Chamberlain. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Kim Chamberlain again. I am the president of SSA IFPTE Local 21. I am also a member of the district staff. I am coming to you again to implore you to start working on a remote work situation for not only our students, but our staff members. It would be in the best interest to keep people employed and continue to work in a productive, effective manner that would keep our students and staff moving forward rather than retreating into a backward spiral. We have many members of our staff that could continue to do their positions if there was a remote work policy put into place. We are doing this for students through independent study, and we are doing this through the virtual learning capacity of our new program. I beg you, I want to sit on this program and work with you all to make this a realization for everyone. I believe that the district's best interest is always to keep staff and students in the most forefront of safety and continuing in a learning environment. Please, let's continue to do this in a productive manner. Let's start this. I'm more than willing to sit on a panel and get going with this. Y'all have my email, y'all have my phone number at work and at home. I'm in Power School, so I know you can find it easily. Thank you very much.
Our next public speaker is Linda Kane. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me 2 minutes. I just wanted to say I wrote, and several people I know wrote letters today to the board members and the superintendent. And we want to urge the superintendent and board trustees to look into and approve continuation of the 3 senior education programs that our school church supported. And that includes Sakura Kai, St. John's, and Christ Lutheran, which are all located in El Cerrito. These programs are really, really important to the seniors, and they mean a lot to us. They keep us socialized. They keep us using our brains. They keep us getting out of the house. And it would be terrible to lose these programs, but there is someone who wants to get rid of the program. So please look into that and support them. And I realize the subject is not in the agenda for today. I totally support safety in the schools, which includes protection from violence, protection from bullying, and all the way to protection against COVID as well. And I hope it's a difficult problem that you all have to deal with, but I wish you the best. But I and my fellow seniors urge you to keep in mind the welfare of all ages, not only children and teenagers, but also the adults and seniors. Thank you very much for your attention.
Our next public speaker is Cindy George. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Gus. I'm with Public Advocates. My comment is around the nearly $9 million investment over the course of 3 years on safety staff that was presented at the DL CAPS last night. And as it relates to tonight's presentation around school climate and safety, I would like to know more information around the job description for the new school safety support specialist and what the position will look like. Studies have shown that rather than promoting school safety, school hardening measures such as increased security guards, more frequent student searches, and enhanced surveillance, among others, are counterproductive and hinder students' progress towards improved student engagement and school climate. Instead, I urge the district to invest in supports that are restorative, such as school-based mental health centers and services, especially during this time as students are experiencing an increased trauma due to the pandemic. Thank you.
Next public speaker is Ivy Winston. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening. This is Ivy Winston. I've been actively engaged and involved with this community for the last 25 years with servicing our kids of West Contra Costa Unified School District. And I'm just here to tell you all that our students are suffering on these school sites. The school sites are so violent right now, have kids that are chronically depressed. They're literally crying on their way to school. I'm getting videos of kids that's being brutally attacked while other kids are around cheering and videotaping. Staff that are present are only giving verbal requests for them to stop because they can't intervene or get involved because of their safety and also their limitations. And I'm asking you to please consider bringing the SROs back on school sites because it's greatly affecting our kids. Our students and our parents fought a couple of years ago to keep the SROs in the schools. I don't know why they were removed, but now our kids are suffering, especially since our communities are now segregated into different wards or districts. So you have kids from south, north, Central, they're being on school sites with each other, and their issues from their divided communities are now spilling over into school sites, and the kids know that nothing could happen because of the lack of supervision. The next thing is we had reports of gunshots over at De Anza, which was an off-campus issue, but it affected our kids because one of our kids was shot. So I'm asking you again to please consider bringing the SROs back onto our school sites for safety purposes for our students. Thank you.
Next public speaker is Maria G. Please unmute yourself and state your last name for the record.
Yes, hi, my name is Maria, and I am the mother of one of the children in special education. And I would like to comment and express my concern over the vaccination mandate that's coming around the corner here, and the fact that my son has an underlying medical condition where he has a rare condition, and there's not enough knowledge on his condition as there's not enough knowledge on the vaccination. And when people say that it's comparable to the polio vaccine and that it should be added, it's absolutely different and doesn't apply, and it shouldn't be considered as one of the typical vaccinations. And I really want that to be expressed to the top, that I'm talking on behalf of tons of parents who feel the same way. And we are all concerned about COVID. However, there's so much science evidence that says that my son has had COVID already. He has the immune, he has it already in his system. Therefore, he already has the exposure. And it really needs to be not taken lightly, because it's so much more than what the news is saying. And it's just not the route to take for our children. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is Jose DeLeon. Please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, board. Good afternoon, Superintendent Hurst. On the subject of how do we bring better climate to our sites, we need to continue making spaces for training to make sure that not only administration, but the teachers have the ability to promote the SEL curriculum. I think especially for secondaries and for elementaries, we have students that are skipping from 6th grade to 9th grade, that have been at a school for over a year and a half. And we need to bring students, with the help of our parents, back into an academic mode. It's super important that, especially in the secondaries and the elementaries, if there are wellness centers, that there are clear procedures at every wellness center to support the students. We know that every administrator and every teacher is always have the safety of the students in the forefront of our decisions. Thank you.
Our next public speaker is under the name of Art. Please unmute yourself and state your first and last name for the record.
Okay. Hi, I'm Art Harris. I'm a school psychologist in the school district. For the past 7 years, I worked at Neastrom Elementary School, and now I am at Hercules High School, Pinole Middle, and I do some therapy over at Pinole Valley High School also. My focus on my comment is on the social emotional well-being of our children. And one thing I've noticed over the past few years working in South Richmond at Neastrom is that even though that school site has traditionally had a lack of services, they still have done a wonderful job in reducing the amount of violence and problems and suspensions. And I think it's because the buy-in from the staff and students to make the situation better. So even with a lack of staff, they still had a team of people who built in their time to help, right? And so as I work now in Hercules and Pinole, post-pandemic, I'm seeing these same kids struggling to function on campus. There's still some great students, but what's happening is I think there's a less amount of staff available to support the students. There's staff on campus who are still trying to navigate this COVID and are maybe not as hands-on or as close as they used to be. And I see that's one of the reasons the kids are struggling. So my suggestion is that we increase peer supports, peer-to-peer counseling programs, peer-to-peer conflict managers, even peer academic tutoring programs. If we can increase these peer-to-peer social emotional supports, I think we're going to get further than trying to build just SEL programs, because right now staff already have too much on their plate and it's not enough to enforce it anyway, the way that I think it needs to be. But those peers, they can do it if we train them.
Our next public speaker is Idrisa Larrier. Please unmute yourself.
Good evening, board. My name is Idrisa Larrier, and I still have 2 kids left in the district, so I'm be around for a while. And I agree with the first gentleman who spoke. I firmly agree with him that number one, accountability starts at home. Our parents, we need to make sure we talk to our children about their behavior with others and respecting adults. However, the accountability from the board, making sure our children are safe at school. You need to make sure the people we voted in, you need to do your job to make sure our kids are safe. Based on the presentation written on your website, and I quote, WCCUSD believes strongly in creating a district-wide positive relationship-based culture that is supportive of all members of WCCUSD, that is grounded in restorative practices, positive behavior, interventions, and trauma-informed practices and support. I want an example of what you are doing for each and every one of those. I don't see it, because currently there are fights happening every single day with no one to intervene. The teachers don't feel safe and they can't do anything. You have people screaming stop in the background. As a parent, would you rather have an officer there to help stop that, or just have your child's face beaten in while an adult sits there and says, stop, stop, and the kids are cheering it on? It's ridiculous. I worked in juvenile probation many years, and I know that those probation officers and the work closely with the police officers to make sure that those kids are safe. And we need to do anything we can to bring safety back to our kids.
Our next public speaker. Our last public speaker of the night will be George Brown. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, my name is George Brown, and I'm a safety officer for the school district. I'm a rover. I go all over to all the schools, and there is a lot of things going on at the particular schools. I got 2 things I wanna address. One, we need to come back to our dress codes. Our dress codes are not being enforced, or they're not being recognized. And that goes for the boys and the girls. The boys' pants are sagging all the way down to you can see the underwear. The girls are wearing skimpy shirts, pants that's tore up all the way up to areas where they shouldn't be. We don't have enough staff to kind of monitor those particular actions, and there's nothing set in place for those situations. One thing I want to say also, discipline. We're not really staying in the disciplinary actions. has to be enforced throughout the district. More safety officers, more individuals like me should be in the elementary schools. Your teachers cannot do what they need to do in the elementaries. So we need to support them and make sure that we have individuals that will intervene. Last thing, also, the traffic district is horrified. We have certain schools that just traffic. So.
Our last public speaker of the night will be Theresa Hardy. Please unmute yourself.
Hello, good evening. I am a Valley View parent and a Soskin parent. I have 2 children at Valley View Elementary and 1 at Soskin Middle School. And I wanted to say that we are thrilled to be in person, as I know many teachers and staff are. We are happy to be there. We understand that this last almost 2 years has been extremely difficult for everyone involved. There's a lot of grief, there's a lot of trauma. But sadly, over the last few weeks, from a few students, we've had so many behavioral issues that it's made school a scary and stressful place for my kids and other kids. So I'm asking that we get help. Our staff is in short supply all over the district, and we know that. But we are asking that our principal and staff get support. They are doing the best that they can with limited resources, as I'm sure many schools are. And unfortunately, we're afraid of burnout. There's only so long that people can be asked to be under these circumstances and in such a stressful situation without feeling burnt out. So I definitely agree with many speakers who have talked about social emotional learning. I know that unfortunately that takes a person to do that. I think that's something that our students desperately need another emphasis on. We need more special needs teachers and aides, more playground supervisors, anti-bullying programs that engage kids and help them become good citizens, and wellness centers are desperately needed. And I also would say, as a person who is African-American, I would be interested in having the resource officers come back on campus if that is something that could support our staff. I know that's a longer conversation, but I think we should do anything we can to keep our kids safe. We've got them safe from COVID, now keep them safe together. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone who called in today to express their concerns. So next, we're going to go to item B4, which is agenda review and adoption. Can I have a motion to approve this agenda or adopt this agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Christian. Is there a second?
Reckler, second.
Seconded by Reckler. Trustee Smith Folds, can you begin the vote, please?
Smith Folds, yes.
Christian, yes.
Reckler, yes.
Phillips, yes. The agenda is adopted. We are going to now go to item D1, school climate and safety presentation. This presentation is not related to COVID. We are not discussing COVID this evening. That's something that we do regularly. We are talking about social, emotional today and physical safety. Dr. Hurst, please take it away.
Thank you, sir. We'd just like to introduce 2 of our primary speakers this evening. We have Ashante Smith and also Mr. Michael Booker. And as you said, sir, they're going to be speaking to us this evening on how we're keeping our students safe and our staff safe. And we're looking at 2 primary areas. We're looking at safety from a social emotional perspective and also a physical perspective. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Ms. Smith.
Good evening, board.
Good evening, board and community. As Dr. Hirsch just stated, we're going to go through a presentation focusing on school climate and safety with specific emphasis on the social, emotional, and physical safety of our students. Next slide, please. So we want to ground ourselves in a resolution that we passed back in the 2017 to 2018 school year. And in that resolution, it was dedicated to creating a positive school climate for all stakeholders in our school district. And really, the resolution called out that our district will ground ourselves in restorative practices, positive behavior interventions and supports, and trauma-informed practices to support all stakeholders in the West Contra Costa Unified School District. Next slide. So why are we talking about school climate? We know that the research shows that climate is important in everything that we do on our school campuses, and it highly supports the academic achievement of our students. But we also know that the education system was not designed to emphasize relationships, personalized learning for students, and it was not designed to emphasize how a young person's racial and social economic background may shape their learning experiences or may shape their experiences of school climate. We also know that our students come to school with some heavy needs, and not all of our students respond appropriately, but just like everything else, we must teach appropriate behavior to students who are lacking the skills. Behavior is a form of communication, and through behavior, students are communicating something in every moment, even if they're not aware of it. And then lastly, we know that the effects of trauma and community violence are real, and they spill over into our school settings. Next slide, please. So there's various factors affecting climate and safety. On the emotional side, we have perception of safety. We know that we all come in with different values, norms, and attitudes. We know historically that there has been a lack of access to needed behavioral health services for students. We know that community factors come into play, and then a lack of dedicated supports in school for social and emotional learning. On the physical side of things, we know factors that affect safety are things such as insufficient school security, outdated technology protocols and policy, the way that our schools are designed, and then inadequate access control, natural surveillance, and territorial reinforcement, which Mr. Booker will be going into in deeper later on in the presentation. Next slide. So now that we know our why, let's ground ourselves in some data. So we're going to quickly go through these slides, but what you'll see is that we have shown and presented to you a 5-year trend of the data that we've seen on our campuses. And I will preface this with that all of this data are the behaviors that we're seeing. So we can quickly go through these slides. So this is our data from 2015-16. We have our data from 2016-17. We can continue to 2017-18. There's a summary slide. Next slide. This is our data from our last complete school year, 2018 to 2019. Next slide. And then this was our data from 2019 to 2020, and we know that schools were shut down in March of 2020. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give the trend data so that you can see what was happening in our schools in regards to behavior, but this slide really summarizes the behavior that involved violent incidents and weapons on our campuses. So as you can see, the trend data it started very high in 2011 and 2012, but for the past 5 years, we were on a downward trend, And then I want to look specifically at 2017 to 2018, because that was the year that we passed our positive school climate resolution. And if you can see, the following year, our violent incidents went down. And then in 2019, 2020, although it was a partial school year, we were still trending downward. Next slide. So where are we now? Right now, for 2021, 2022, these are all of the behaviors that have been reported in our school district so far. And as you can see, the largest behavior or the highest number of behavior that we are seeing on our campuses are under the code of 501, which is cause, attempted to cause, or threatened to cause physical injury. So these behaviors are most likely students who are engaging in physical fights and or threatening to fight. Next slide, please. This right here shows you all of our suspensions so far. As you can see, our highest number of suspensions have been of African American students. And then if you see the green shade, that means other means of correction. So the other means of correction would mean something was done to the student other than suspension to correct the behavior. Next slide. So really, I wanted to ground us in that data, and our focus is reducing not only suspensions as outlined in our LCAP, but we really want to reduce the occurrences of behaviors. So we're focusing on two main behaviors, and those are our physical behaviors and possession of dangerous items on our campuses. Next slide. So our first goal, and again, I'll preface this by saying that we still have our LCAP goals, which are to reduce suspensions overall and to reduce disproportionality in suspensions. But this is getting more specific. So by the end of the 2021-2022 school year, we want to reduce the number of violent incidents by at least 20% as measured by our incident data system. The baseline data that we are using is from our last complete school year, which was 2018 to 2019. And as you can see, there was 2,050 incidents. Just to give us that same data at this particular point in time, in 2019, we were at 443 incidents. Currently, we are at 159 incidents. So as you can see, fighting and acts of violence has gone down according to our data based on this same point in time in 2019. Next slide. Like I said in the beginning, we also want to reduce the number of incidents involving possession of any dangerous item on our school campuses. This would include guns, imitation guns, explosive, and knives. The baseline data that we're using, again, is from our last full school year, which was 2018 to 2019. There were 58 incidents. At the same point in time, so October 8th, when the data was pulled 2019, we were at 14 incidents, and currently we are at 5 incidents. So again, the data is showing that we have already been trending downward. Next slide. And then we know that reducing violent incidents on campuses and reducing the number of weapons on campuses is not enough, because we also have to think about how are our students feeling when they walk on our campuses day to day. So every year, our students take a school climate survey. And on that survey, one of the questions is, do you feel safe at school? In 2019, our students, all of our students, took the school climate survey, and they were asked, do you feel safe at school? Our elementary students reported 58% positive response rate, which means 58% of the students reported that they feel safe at school, and we want to increase that by 20%. Next slide. We want to do the same for our middle school students. So by the end of the 2021 to 22 school year, we want every middle school in West Contra Costa Unified School District to be at the 65th percentile or higher on student perception of safety rankings. So again, we want every middle school student to have a high perception of safety and feel safe when they go on their campuses. Next slide. And we want the same for our high school. So every high school in West Contra Costa Unified School District will be at the 65th percentile or higher on student perceptions of safety. So we'll pause there for questions.
Thank you very much. So board, we are running a light crew this evening. There are only 4 board members. So I think we do have some time to ask some additional questions. So instead of doing 4, and if we can do more later, we will, but instead of doing 4, I'm gonna ask board members to ask up to 7 questions per presentation. Please remember, after the presentations are over, we're actually going to have discussion. So we have to make sure that we allocate time for discussion if board members have comments. So again, board, please, 7 questions per mini presentation. Trustee Smith-Folds, you're kicking us off this evening.
Do all schools have a climate team or an equivalent of a climate team?
Yes, all schools are required to have a climate team on campus.
Thank you. And then what is an example of trauma-informed practices?
So a trauma-informed practice would be anything from community building in the classroom or teachers de-escalating behaviors by using certain words in the classroom. But trauma-informed practices are really built on the relationships that occur each and every day in the classroom and ensuring that students have a relationship with an adult so that they feel safe in the classroom.
Have teachers been trained in trauma-informed practices?
Yes, teachers have been trained in trauma-informed practices. This school year, we are now working on a scope and sequence to continue the training. We focused the first 6 weeks on the restorative restart, and that was really around utilizing social emotional learning curriculum and restorative practices inside of the classroom. But we'll be talking later on in the presentation about the trainings that we have set for the rest of the school year that teachers can attend to get more skills around these areas.
Thank you. And then what do we do with, for example, the Youth Truth Survey? What do we do with that data on campuses?
So the Youth Truth was taken in the spring, and we went with Youth Truth because the data is given back to us relatively quick, and school sites should be using that data to identify trends, look at what the students are saying, and then put in programs and interventions for the following school year. So the survey is administered in the spring, and then the conversations would be had in the spring, and that's when the results should be given to parent groups, climate teams, and different teams on campuses to then talk about plans put in place based on what the survey data shows.
Thank you. And then when we were in distance learning starting in March 2020, were we taking data on cyber violence?
So we were taking data on all instances of behavior on during virtual learning. So that would include cyber violence, that would include bullying, that would include any ed code violation, and cyber violence and cyberbullying is one of them. So data was collected during distance learning.
Thank you. And then have referral slips changed at all? Are we still using the same referral slips, or have they changed because of the restorative practices that are being input? Have referrals reflected that change and that shift in social emotional learning, trauma-informed practices? Have we changed the referral slips at all?
Yeah, so we're currently piloting an office discipline referral at our CCEIS schools, and we hope to then push this form out to the district. But to your point, the referral forms now have what happened prior to a student being sent out of class, because we're trying to document interventions so that when the team is looking at the best supports for a student, they would be able to identify what interventions have already occurred in the classroom. So that was added. And then there's more detail on the referral form, such as at what time the behavior occurred, what type of activity was the child engaged in. And so there's more questions really geared at how can we best support this child now that they're out of the classroom environment based on the data that we're seeing on the referral form.
And then lastly, how do we ensure that our sites are not under-reporting, right? Because your data is based on administrative reporting. Is that accurate, or how is your data based? Are you only getting the information from administrators and counselors, correct?
That's correct.
Is there a checks and balance to ensure that we're not under-reporting these incidences, or are we just kind of relying on the admin and the sites and the counselors to report?
So we're making a concerted effort at every meeting, and we've already talked to our executive directors about the importance of reporting every incident on campus in our data management system. So that message has been consistently stated across all of our trainings and to our school leaders. And every month during our principal meetings, we have allocated time for social and emotional and behavior. And so we're still emphasizing that everything must be documented, and not just documented for like a aha, got you moment, but really documented so that we can see what is happening on our campuses so that we can get the support to our campuses for our students.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Trustee Smith Folds. Mr. Christian?
Thank you, President Phillips. The first question I have is how are we, with the discipline policy, are we fully utilizing our discipline policy throughout the district, making sure that we all on the same page?
Yeah, so we have a district discipline matrix that was developed after we passed the positive school climate resolution, and that matrix is still in effect. So every school site should be using our district approved behavior matrix, and that has been communicated to principals and admin at sites.
Okay, and the reason why I asked that question, it seemed that a lot of principals are afraid to use the discipline policy.
Mm.
Would you like her to comment on that? Would you like her to comment on that?
Why is that?
Can you repeat your question?
Why are the principals afraid to use discipline policy, and why they are not trying to make sure they bring structure to their school?
I'm not sure why any principal would be afraid to use the policy. We emphasize that this is our district approved matrix and that this matrix should be used. In addition to consequences, the matrix lists interventions that can be done and other means of correction, but we are continuing to emphasize the matrix being used as a response to discipline on our campuses.
And then, we looking at safety, it's a lot of areas, but even the dress code, it's a lot of different things, but are we enforcing those different policies?
Is your question, are we enforcing like dress code policies?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are enforcing everything that is outlined, all behaviors that are outlined in our discipline matrix.
I just wanted to add to that, Trustee Christian. It goes back to what LaShante Smith was saying earlier about expectations have certainly been set with all school sites across the district and with all principals. One of the things that we're doing with our EDs is really making sure, one, they're working with their principals, they're supporting their principals, and we're really trying to enforce this whole concept of consistency. So it's an ongoing work in progress that we're doing with our EDs. But that's the work of the EDs, really to support the principals for consistency's sake.
Okay. And then the next one would be, I know we've seen a lot of bullying from the social media to everything. So how do we, dealing with the bullying, a lot of kids, don't feel safe when, or coming to school, feeling safe because they're being bullied. How we're dealing with the bullies, how we dealing with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at a tier 1 level, and we'll talk about this later on in the presentation, what every school site has, but when I say tier 1, that means universal, every student should be receiving. We are implementing social emotional learning curriculum, and in that curriculum, there are identified units for bullying for all grade levels. So in the classroom, students would be reinforced to show positive behaviors, to report bullying, and that would be through the use of the lessons. In addition to that, our school sites have a tier 2 team, which would be how do we triage and get individual student support, and that can come through an SST or a care team. So if a student was being bullied, there are processes at site so that that student is supported.
Okay, and then the other one would be, how is our restorative justice practices working we have in the school? How are they working?
Yeah, so we still have a restorative practices consultant, and how restorative practices are kind of implemented is that tier 1 is really about restoring community and building relationships. Restorative justice comes in after harm has been done. So if there is student conflict or harm done to another student or staff member, that's where the restorative justice process comes in at. And we have been training all of our staff on restorative practices and restorative justice practices, and we will continue the training. And later on, I'll talk about the scope and sequence for restorative practices and getting everyone from the CSSs to the teachers to our admin trained in restorative practices.
Okay, that's it. That's it for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Reckler?
Thank you. So thank you for the presentation. Nice to see you again. And for my first question, for the historical data 2015 through 2020, would you be able to summarize and pull out some nuggets of that? What does the data tell you on all these bar graphs?
So the data tells you, starting in 2015, the behavior that we were seeing most often was disruption and defiance. But you know that when we passed the positive school climate resolution, we were no longer suspending or excluding students for disruption and defiance alone. So then after that, you see a pattern of behavior, and it's all around the cause, attempted to cause, and threatened to cause physical injury. So that's showing that there are more fights on our campuses. But as I said, after we passed that resolution in 2017 to 2018 to really commit to trauma-informed and restorative practices, we did start seeing a downward trend.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then I wanted to talk about the positive school climate resolution that was passed, I believe it was in November 2017.
Mhm.
And if you could summarize for the audience, and many people were not here at that time, in your opinion, how did it fare? How did it do? Were there strengths? What opportunities looking back on the work that was done, what opportunities, what worked, what didn't, what's the feel after these years?
So I think back in 2017, when we passed it, the movement was really around reducing exclusionary practices that disproportionately affected our African American students and other subgroups such as our special education population and our homeless students. And so we passed this resolution to really put in measures that schools would be utilizing restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, and other interventions to respond to student behavior. And so what I think we did a good job at is that we did develop a rollout of restorative practices. And we started with thinking about what should be at every school site to ensure that there is support for not only the site, but for students. And so that was through the implementation of climate teams. And so we were training climate teams. We were going through processes that ensure that there are like systems across our school district. And so we started with making sure that every site had identified expectations. Every site was adhering to a consequence system, and every site was also utilizing a reinforcement system. In addition to that, we had that tiered behavioral matrix that outlined, again, other means of correction and other interventions that can be used to address student behavior, because the focus was really to stop relying on suspension, because suspension does not change student behavior. And so we want to ensure that we're actually putting in interventions that change student behavior and not just kind of mass student behavior. So we've been doing that. And then I would say where we fell short was really providing staff to implement the resolution. And when I say that, I mean we need dedicated support staff that can be tied to school sites to support student behavior and to support student level interventions. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Because I think we needed to set the stage for the work that was done previously. And, because my feeling is based on all the years of that work.
Yeah, so this is continuing that work. And later on in the presentation, excited to talk about how we're going to really strengthen that resolution with dedicated staffing to continue the work toward really being a restorative and trauma-informed district.
Okay, the next question may jump the gun just a little bit, but is there a plan to further involve students, or should I hold that for later?
I can answer now. Yeah, the plan is always to involve students and try to get youth voice into what we're doing. And so kind of going back to think about how are we looking at surveys and looking at what our young people are saying. In addition to that, our school sites are monitoring social and emotional goals. And part of that is through the use of surveys and student perception data to determine what's needed and next steps.
Okay, and then the last question for this round is for pages 17, 18, and 19, where goals are stated. Once again, I don't know if this comes later, but is there budget you need? Additional supports that you need? How the exact operations of how these will be achieved? And a cadence for reporting out on results.
Yeah, so later on, I will talk about some accountability measures we put in place, and I'll talk about additional staffing that we are going to hire for now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Reckler. You can go to the next part of the presentation.
Sure. So continuing with our talking about social emotional safety at our school sites. So we do have a theory of action. In this theory of action, the first part is actually taken from our positive school climate resolution. And that's all around if we use data-based and data-driven decision-making and a multi-tiered systems of support framework, then we will see a district-wide positive relationship-based culture that's supportive of all members. And again, grounded in restorative practices, trauma-informed practices, utilizing the PBIS framework. And then the second part of it is, I already talked about that behavior is a form of communication, and we have to teach appropriate behavior just like we teach reading, math, literacy, everything that we teach in our schools. So if we teach needed or lagging skills, or we address, adapt, or accommodate the expectation that a student cannot meet, we will then eliminate the need for maladaptive behavior, which would eliminate the need for suspension, as a student will possess the skills to be a positive contributor to the school community. Next slide. So again, social emotional safety is connected to school climate because school climate is defined as the norms, values, and expectations that support people feeling socially, emotionally, and physically safe. And we know that when we think about positive school climate, an emphasis is also placed on the collective sense of safety and care for a school's physical environment. Next slide. So I'm going to walk us through our framework for social emotional learning and behavior support in our district. And then Mike is going to walk us through the physical safety piece. But I put this slide here because these two frameworks are interconnected. So when we talk about the social, emotional, and behavior side of things, we always start with prevention or universal practices. We then go into intervention, we have our responses, and then we have our third level, which is how are we going to respond to students or to social emotional issues that are beyond the preventative and the intervention levels. Next slide. So again, thinking about social emotional support, how this presentation is broke up is that this first part is going to talk about the tier 1 supports that are across our system. I want to preface this by saying that these supports are in all of our schools at a minimum. And then schools may have other tier 1 practices that they are using above and beyond what we're going to discuss right now. So this is really coming from like a central lens and thinking about how are we supporting our students at that universal level. So tier 1 supports are in place across our district, and those include clearly defined expectations at every school site, a system for teaching the expectation to students, a reinforcement system, and then a consequence system that is restorative, but also responsive to student needs. We also have social and emotional learning curriculum being implemented in our classrooms, and the district curriculum that we adopted is Sanford Harmony, Second Step, and School Connect. Sanford Harmony and Second Step are for our K through 6th grade students. Second Step can be used in middle school, so 6th through 8th, and then School Connect is for high school. And then we're emphasizing restorative practices and community building inside of every classroom. Then across our system, we have climate teams to identify behavioral trends and determine supports. We have the district behavior matrix that is used across our system. And then we also have our internal data system to reflect on the climate data that we're seeing across the district. Next slide. In addition, new this year, we're excited that we're going to be able to implement a school-wide universal screener, and the first administration of that will be in November. And really, this screener is different than the climate survey because this screener is based on individual student need. So students from grade 2 through 12 will take a brief screener that asks them a variety of questions, and from that, we'll be able to see students who are at risk for social, emotional, and behavior problems. The good thing about using a screener is that you don't have to wait for students to behave maladaptively. We're trying to be proactive to identify the students who are in need of more support and then get them that support before they have to act out to get it. Teachers will be trained to use the data from the screener to refer students who may be in need of additional support. And then school teams will also be trained on how to use this data to determine what supports are needed at a campus. In addition, at the central level, we'll be looking at this data to determine where do we need to put different supports in place on our campuses for students. And then we'll make sure that we continue to implement those strategies. So I'm looking, sorry. Can you go back, Rosa? Back. Okay, sorry. We were showing the wrong slide, but this was the slide that I was just discussing, which is about the screener. Next slide. So for tier 2, which are students who need more support than just tier 1. So everything I just discussed was for tier 1. All students will receive. Tier 2 is supplemental. And so across our system, what's in place, our care team and SST processes on campus, which identify students who need additional resources. We have individualized learning plans for students who are in need of more support. Our school sites partner with behavior and mental health staff for targeted group support. We have alternatives to suspension and other means of correction for students outlined in our discipline matrix. And then we have a reporting process and support for student suspensions. And in our resolution, it stated that sites will consult with the EDs before suspension of any student. The resolution actually stated before suspension of African-American students, but this year it's for any student who is being suspended from school. The site leader will have to consult with their ED. Next slide. And then we know that there are students who will not respond to tier 1 or tier 2 supports and need an extra dosage of supports. And what that looks like across our system is that we have site-based partnerships with community-based organizations to implement individualized interventions. We have a process for referring and identifying students in need of additional support. And then we have re-entry conferences for students returning from suspension or students returning from juvenile hall. Next slide. So this is new, and I was speaking before about just some new things we're putting in place to really put strength and teeth behind that positive school climate resolution that we passed. So these are all from a central level supporting social emotional safety. We are in the process of hiring 4 centrally funded social workers who will support at every tier, and they'll be tied to school areas, and there'll be direct support at school sites for behavior, and they'll be providing interventions. We'll have 4 centrally funded school community outreach workers, and the goal for the outreach workers will be to provide case management, but really to link in the family to the support that the student may be receiving and give greater connection or leverage greater connection to community resources. For tier 3, we have 2 board certified behavior analysts who will support behavior for students who are requiring tier 3 intervention. We have contracts in place right now for behavior consulting services, which will really help for training and capacity building for our district psychologists to support behavior at their school site as well. And then we have new partnerships with agencies for violence prevention. And so we just signed or just agreed to 2 partnerships with 2 agencies that will specifically work with students who are at risk for community violence. Next slide. So this is a new structure we're also putting in place. And this is what we're calling a circle of care, not to be confused with the care team or an SST team that will take place on specific campuses, but this is really support for schools when they have exhausted their resources and need another level of like wraparound support for a student. So we're working on building out a process where we're stabilizing the student at their current school, but providing supports beyond the school site, and then having tighter case management and individualized support for the student and family. And really, it's increased partnerships with community agencies as well to support students who need those interventions, and then having multiple people at the table to discuss a specific case so that we're really utilizing all of our resources to wrap around the student. Next slide. This is just going into some of our response strategies in regards to social emotional safety. It's a 3-level response. So level 1 is always a site response. An example, that can be a student fight, a conflict, or an isolated student crises event. Level 2 is a district resource where someone from the district would come out to a site to respond. And this could be a student death, a major fight, a teacher death. It's something that's beyond the school site's resources. And then a level 3 response would be a major crisis. And it could be like a neighborhood conflict where multiple folks need to get involved to support the school site, which may include community-based organizations and outside organizations. Next slide. So really, after all that I just spoke about, there are still some identified areas of concern that we have and that we have identified as a district. We're still working on a system to clearly define teams at sites that track site level interventions, and not only the interventions, but the fidelity of the interventions on sites. A monitoring process for the implementation of teams that are designed to support our students. So we have our climate team, our care teams, and our SST, but we want greater monitoring of those processes so that we know that students are getting support. There is a need for deeper collaboration with our community because, again, we know that students come into school with community issues, and we want to make sure we're involving our community and have them at the table at all times to support our students. We know that we need more central office staffing dedicated to climate and social emotional learning for students, and to be able to train our teachers in the classroom in implementing these different things around social emotional learning. Professional development and accountability for schools. And then there have been some teacher contract issues regarding SEL implementation on our campuses. So based on that, we do have an action plan, and we are committed to, at the end of this first semester, doing walkthroughs on all of our school campuses that will really serve as a needs analysis. We want to see, we're going to be utilizing a tiered fidelity index tool as well as an observation tool to see to what extent are campuses implementing the PBS framework to fidelity, what systems are in place to connect students to services, how are school sites using the data to drive system level intervention for behavior, what resources are on campus, and the most important thing is, are those resources connected to the need that we're seeing in the data? So really becoming data driven and data aligned. And then looking at a training calendar and how teachers are being supported in implementing social emotional learning and supporting students' behavior. Next slide, questions.
Smith Folds, 7, please.
President Phillips, I think I actually have maybe 8, but they are small ones. Ms. Smith, the TK through 2nd grade, how are we, you said we're doing screeners for 2nd grade and above. How are we dealing with TK through 2nd or TK, K, and 1?
So TKK and 1 is not a self screener, it's a teacher screener. So the teacher would be rating the student's behavior.
Okay. Where do the parents come in with our tiers? Are we contacting parents right away at tier 1? So every parent is contacted about the standards, what we want to see in schools, the norms. Are you contacting parents at tier 2, tier 3, or all the way?
All the way. Parents should be contacted at tier 1 and should know what's going on in the classroom in regards to social emotional learning at every level. And then parents would definitely be contacted at tier 2 if students are getting more support, and then tier 3 if other supports are needed and if wraparound support is needed.
Thank you for that. And what does a consultation look like for a suspension? You said principals have to have a consultation with their EDs. What would that entail? Is it just a principal picking up the phone saying, this is the incident that happened, what do you think I should do? Or is it a ED coming to the site and having to sit down and listening to the incident from all perspectives? What does a consultation look like with an ED?
The consultation currently looks like a phone call is made to the ED, and the ED and principal walk through the suspension. The principal will explain the reason for suspension, and the ED will ask about other means of correction, what was done prior to, if there were other interventions attempted. And then at the end of that conversation, the ED will then have the site leader proceed with the suspension and or recommend another means of correction besides suspension.
Thank you for that. And how many school psychologists do we currently have now?
1 second, we can get the information. I do know we have at least 1 assigned to each school site. And Ms. Hardy is pulling up the exact number.
Okay.
Trustee Smith Folds, while she's bringing that up, I'm just going to ask you if you can stay with 7. We're probably going to have time for people to ask additional questions past that. I'm just trying to make sure that we space it out so we get through everything. But at the pace that we're going, I think that we will be able to ask some more questions. But if you can just.
Okay, so we're at 4 now. And I'm waiting for
Yes,
the
ma'am.
psychologist. Okay, and then, Ms. Smith, who will do the walkthrough? Will that include community people? Who will be on the walkthroughs?
Currently, it'll be our Office of School Climate in collaboration with our Office of African American Student Achievement. We'll be doing the walkthroughs at the sites.
Okay, and then it said that you will have 4 social workers and each one gets an area, but we have 5 areas. So if somebody's sharing, how's it going to be divvied up?
Thank you for that. It should have been more specific to areas that are tied to the EDs. So there's 3 ED areas, and then we'll have an extra one that will be supporting across the district.
Okay, so it's based on like the secondary EDs, they get one, another ED gets one, and then another ED gets one, right? Is that kind of how, okay. And then did we get an answer about the number of psychologists?
59.
59, okay. And then Ms. Smith, how sure are we that SEL learning is happening on every campus, or are we going to confirm that when we do the walkthroughs?
We are going to confirm that when we're doing the walkthroughs to make sure that not only SEL is being done, but it's being implemented to fidelity in the classroom.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Trustee Smith Folds. And I do think we'll be able to come back for some extras before we leave. Trustee Christian?
Yes, thank you, President Phillips. Thank you. Question, going back to the few of the things you mentioned, when the kids go into juvenile hall, so when they come back, how are they integrated back? Are they given the services when they come back in?
Yeah, so when students return from juvenile hall, we have a meeting with them. And at that meeting, we discuss what supports are needed for their success and for their transition back on campus. And then that is given to the school site. And then we are doing tighter case management now to ensure that the students receive the supports when they're back on their campus.
Okay.
So it starts with the meeting that also involves their parent and any other person that's connected to the young person.
All right, and then the next one will be, when you hear of disruptive students, throughout the district, and they constantly disrupting the educational process, disrupting, what do you do?
For disruption specifically? So you would, basically it's outlined in our discipline matrix, but there's several interventions you can attempt. If the disruption continues, there's then a progressive discipline actions that take place. So it can, it can first start with an intervention, it can start with the counseling, but then it can go as far as suspension and other means of correction if it continues.
Okay, and then where it leads into like, because I hear the word willful defiance, of how that, so when students able to, you hear students getting away with so much stuff and running mockery of staff, you just constantly hearing that. What are we doing?
Right, and so that's why we're really trying to put supports in place to support social and emotional and behavioral health of students. I know that you're aware that California passed a law that bans suspension for willful defiance alone. And then our resolution, our positive school climate resolution, actually bans suspension for willful defiance as well.
We did it first, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that, Mr. Phillips, that we did it before the law was passed in California to not suspend for willful defiance. So the goal is to put other interventions in place to support that student's behavior, but to really monitor to ensure that that intervention is resulting in a decrease in behavior.
Right.
So it's really case specific to what that student needs.
right? And I'm just being, if you go out there and run the traffic light, you're gonna get a ticket, right? So, I mean, there's consequences behind, I'm just throwing that out. There's consequence.
So let me just say this really quick. We will have discussion tonight. So I know when we have the superintendent reports, it's only questions, but you will have an opportunity, everyone, to say what is on their mind about this particular issue.
And the next one will be Sylvester Greenwood. Who goes to Sylvester Greenwood?
Students in need of credit recovery.
So, I mean, we used to have Harvard Way Academy, or was it those other schools? And we got rid of that school and we tied everything into Sylvester Greenwood. So when you have a lot of disruptive students from all over, so my understanding that they used to go to Sylvester Greenwood or went in that direction.
So we used to have alternative programs for students who were not responding to site level interventions as part of our district schools.
Right.
We don't have Harbor Way anymore. So we are really working to determine how we can support students when their need is beyond that of the site. And so that's why we're implementing that new circle of care process I talked about. And in that, we're talking about like, where can this student be best supported? In the past, Greenwood has been a place for students, but Greenwood is really focused on credit recovery. But if a student is in 11th or 12th grade, is in need of credits, and would benefit from a smaller school environment, that option is still on the table.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Trustee Reckler.
Thank you. On page 25, the curriculums that were chosen for social emotional learning, can you talk about what made them stand out, why they were selected?
Yes, because they're all evidence-based curriculum. So there's evidence that if you use it to fidelity, there was a decrease in maladaptive behaviors and an increase in pro-social behaviors. And they're evidence-based at every grade level. And they were normed on populations that look like ours.
And then these will be required to be implemented?
So because of teacher contractual issues, we cannot require them to be implemented in the classroom, but we have highly recommended that they be implemented in every classroom. And there's little prep work to be done by the teacher to implement them. So the lessons are made, the prep work is very little. And so we're highly recommended that they be done across our system. And we're moving toward making sure that we're moving toward a place where it is mandatory to be done in our classrooms.
And if a school or a class is using something else, what happens? Or
so we have a couple of sites who were using other curricula. Some were not evidence-based. So if it was not an evidence-based curriculum, we asked that they supplement with the curriculum they were using, but use an evidence-based curriculum. And then for the sites, there was about 2 sites who were using another program that was evidence-based. So we allowed them to continue to use that program.
okay, thank you. Next question is back again to the budget. Are all positions on page 29 budgeted?
Yes.
Ongoing?
Yes.
So we are utilizing some one-time funding through special education to get a start on these programs, particularly because a number of the students in the populations that we've been discussing would either be considered for referral for special education evaluation without alternative support, or may be in special education currently in order to support success in the current level of programming for them. And then there are plans to discuss, transitioning those supports into longer term and different funding beyond the one-time funding.
But if they're one time, there is a possibility that it doesn't repeat, correct?
There is, but given what is being discussed at the federal level, I believe that there's going to be avenues for this funding to be continued. And in addition, the one-time funding actually probably will end up being ongoing funding, possibly in the general fund. We'll know more within the next 6 months or so exactly how this current one-time funding is going to continue on.
Okay, thank you. The next question is the circle of care. How fast do you expect that to be up and operating?
Yeah, we actually had our first kind of circle of care with a student at a school already. And so we're continuing to refine the referral process, but that has already been introduced to 4 of our sites. And then at our next meeting with all of our leaders, we'll be introducing the process for referring students. And again, that's for when sites have exhausted their resources. So we're really looking to see that sites have also tried site level interventions. And then I'll just add that this was put in place too, because we don't want to just continue to transfer our students across our school sites. We want to make sure that we're coordinating to ensure that students are going to sites with support and that we're continuing to monitor some of our higher need students.
And then finally, for this round, are there other large like districts that look like us, feel like us, population that you look to and that are successful, and maybe some of the reasons why, or
So yeah, so LAUSD, which is way larger than us, they did, however, pass a kind of like a resolution last year dedicated to climate as well. And what they've done is invested in social emotional health. And they've also added like climate specialists on each site that can support student behavior. So I've been looking at that model. And then in San Bernardino, they also have a model of how they're utilizing positive behavior interventions and support, and really starting with that framework to then identify how to continue to support students throughout their educational journey. So I think both districts are really utilizing a trauma-informed and positive behavior interventions and support framework.
Okay, thank you. That's it for this round.
Thank you very much. One of the callers mentioned peer-to-peer conflict resolution or mediation. I can't remember exactly the term that they used, but are we doing any peer-to-peer work?
Yes, we are working out a system to think about how do we use young people in the conflict mediation process. So before COVID, we were training peers to be like peacekeepers on their campuses. And so that's something that we're continuing to explore in regards to the implementation and rollout of what that would look like. But right now we're trying to first train our teachers in the classroom, and then we'll get to how are we supporting then schools to identify student leaders to support behavior on campuses, because I mean, the research is very strong around peer-to-peer support.
Trustee Christian just mentioned Harbor Way. Does staff still want Harbor Way?
I would say that we continue to explore what is the best option for our younger students, so grades kindergarten through 6th, to support stabilizing them and providing them with an environment that would support their transition back to a comprehensive school site. So we've still been discussing what a version of Harbor Way would look like in this district. And I think you may remember, but we were talking about Harbor Way. It was actually the last school board meeting before we shut schools down. And so we've been continuing to think about what the best kind of programming will be based on what we're seeing. And so we'll continue that conversation.
Are you guys going to bring a recommendation to the board for reopening Harbor Way in whatever fashion?
Yes.
When?
So we've already engaged in the conversation. Right now, we haven't had a large number of behaviors in our younger population to have a need for Harbor Way. So I would say that we're continuing to design what that program would actually look like. And then the most important part is where that program would be. But there's still a staff member allocated technically to the Harbor Way program in any iteration that we bring. In addition to that, we do have a county program that's now located in Richmond that supports students from grades 7 through 12. And before we didn't have that option. So we do have an option right now for our older students. It's thinking about what's the best option for our younger students.
What are the objections do teachers have to teaching the SEL curriculum in class?
So the objections that I've heard so far is that it's not a part of the contract and it's not explicitly stated in the contract that teachers have to teach social emotional learning or use any district quote unquote mandated curriculum. So that's been the biggest objection so far. Correct. And then the other objection has been that it's not a part of their schedule. So if it's not scheduled on the school site, like for instance, there's an allocated time for social emotional learning built into the master schedule, then the objection has been, I have to teach my core curriculum and this curriculum would then be interfering with my core curriculum.
And you guys are having conversations with the teachers as to why this is important that they teach.
Absolutely.
Those are my questions.
I would just want to add, Trustee Phillips,
Go
that,
ahead and add.
what'd you say, Trustee?
I said, go ahead and add all
Okay.
you want.
Okay. That the conversation is definitely being had with the principals around how to really engage teachers, that social emotional learning is important. There are some challenges with some of the calendars as well. So for example, calendars and schedules. So if you don't have an advisory or a homeroom, there's also a feeling that the homeroom or advisory was dedicated to something else, whether that be college, and career preparation or information to students, whatever they would normally do during homeroom or advisory. There has been some pushback of being able to use that time specifically for those other things that are not necessarily SEO related. And this is more so in our middle schools and our high schools.
Thank you very much. We can go to the next presentation.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This evening, can you guys hear me? Okay. This evening, I'm going to talk about the physical safety part of our presentation. And basically what I'm going to touch on is our prevention strategy, our intervention, our staffing levels for the CSs, our response in terms of the levels of responses, our areas of concern, and finally our fidelity walkthrough. I want to emphasize though that this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Although we look at best practice with regard to other districts and other cities and other states, we also have to be mindful that what works best for us. And so as far as physical safety is concerned, I'm going to walk you through what we do, not only as a district, but what we do within our school communities, as well as our individual schools. And I just want to also emphasize that this is a layered approach. It's not just one item that's going to make us safe. And then finally, I want to say that while everybody else has been focused on COVID, not only have we been focused on that, but we've also been focused on safety in general. So with that being said, I want to start you with the school safety procedures. And the first thing that we do is we try to limit the points of access onto our campus. Ultimately, we would like to have one point of access, but we have emphasized to our sites that if you had more than one point of access, like say a teacher's parking lot, that be monitored, and making sure that it is physically monitored, whether it's by using a CSO or some staff at this site. And then we want to look at what we do with our lanyard and ID procedures. At the secondary level, we are focused on the students and staff having ID at all times. And at the elementary level, we want to make sure that each adult or staff has that ID as well. And you may ask the question, why is that? Well, we want to make sure that anybody that is on our campuses is identified at all times. And then we focus on, we have a closed campus policy, and we've had one for some years, and we want to make sure that we are enforcing that at all times. So we want to make sure that people aren't leaving out, and we want to make sure that people aren't coming in. As far as our visitor sign-in procedure, currently under COVID, we require that you make an appointment before you come to the school. And when you come to the school, you have to show proof of vaccination, or you have to have a negative test within the 72-hour period of that time that you come to the site. So that has been in place since we started school, and we are enforcing that currently at our sites. We also use the Facilitron system. That is for our employees. And the system is basically using a QR code, and you can use it by your phone. If you don't feel comfortable using your phone, you can use a tablet or a Chromebook. And you would log in. It's 4 questions. You fill out those 4 questions. You put the locations where you're going to be on campus, and it logs you in. And that is primarily for contact tracing purposes, but it helps us to know who is on our campuses at all times. Facility assessments. These are as needed or as requested. We make sure that if a site is needing an assessment, whether it's for evacuation routes, whether it's for seeing how we can make the site safer, we do those assessments through the district safety team. And next is, it was on a previous slide and it said CEPTED, it's crime prevention through environmental design. And that is an international strategy that has been used for some time, not only with schools, but with communities as well. And in this CEPTED strategy, it focuses on the natural surveillance. So the placing physical features to make sure that we maximize visibility. And then we focus on the principles are natural access control, territorial reinforcement, and finally, management and maintenance. So that's a strategy we use when we look at our sites to make sure that we are keeping those sites as safe as they can be. And then for our events, we have operational plans. So for our graduations, for our sporting events, we have operational plans that are due, and we review them to make sure that we not only have the proper personnel, but we also have everything in place that we need to make that safe. And then we look at the site supervision protocols. The campus safety specialists. We want to make sure that not only are they visible, but they are properly trained. So for the last few years, we have gotten them additional training to focus on conflict mediation, amongst other trainings that we do throughout the year. And we also make sure that they are visible on those campuses using what we call a quadrant approach at each site, the sites that have the specialists. And then we look at the supervision. So this is new, and we did this at the high school level where we have incorporated supervisors so that the CSSs could have a first line of supervision and making sure that they are held more accountable. We have 6 high schools that have are allocated those supervisors positions. We currently have 3 filled with 1 just being offered the position, and we still have 2 high schools that still need supervision or supervisors. And then we look at community-based organizations and teachers' visibility. We want to make sure that if we have a CBO on site, that they are visible. If they're going to deal with our children, we want to make sure that they are visible and that the kids know them, and they also act as territorial reinforcement, meaning that they're a positive figure in a school environment that kids can go to if needed. And the teachers, although we can't require them to walk the halls, we ask that our teachers stand at their doorway during passing periods so they can make sure that young people are going to class and making sure that nothing is occurring during those passing periods in those hallways. And then we look at improved CSS and student communication, making sure that our CSSs are talking to young people in an appropriate manner and making sure that they are having communication or dialogue that is fruitful for that site. And then we look at, or what we are doing is trying to make sure that we reduce the foot traffic during instructional hours. One of the issues that we have had in the past is that it's too much foot traffic. And we want to make sure during instructional time, those kids are in the class learning. So we are focused on that. And then finally, we are updating our comprehensive site safety plans on a yearly basis. It's a mandate by CDE. Those are posted on our website and are available to the public. Of course, they are redacted, but those safety plans help with the overall safety for the site. Next slide, please. And then we talk about the intervention strategies. What we look at is increased training for our campus safety specialists, like I mentioned before. And they also use CPI training to help with conflict mediation, as well as strategies to de-escalate situations in the school with the students. We also have a WeTip hotline. We've actually had this for years. And this is an anonymous reporting system that people can use to report issues or crimes on campus. And then we are fully invested in the restorative justice practices. And we make sure that the CSs are trained in that and making sure that they are a part of the process. And we also look at our conflict mediation, like Ms. Smith said, we look at our conflict mediation strategies, as well as who our violence prevention partnerships are with. And then finally, we also look at or offer alcohol and drug intervention. Next slide, please. This slide looks at the staffing for the CSSs, the campus safety specialists. In the first column, you have the staffing that we currently have. In the next area, we have what we would like to have. We currently have 43 CSs, and that includes 2 rovers. With the addition of the 10 supervisors, it brings our staffing level up to 53. So if you look at this slide, you will see that we do have some sites that are not at full capacity, but we are working towards that. If we hire internally for a supervisor's position, that position is then posted and filled accordingly. If we can't get a position filled, we try through HR, we make sure that we are taking all the available resources in terms of recruiting and making sure that we get those positions filled. Next slide, please. This is our response level. Ms. Smith talked about this, but we have level 1s, and that's all site-based. And the site leader determines the root cause for the disruption and develops a plan of action to mitigate those actions. Level 2 is where district staff gets involved, whether it's the director or the executive director collaborates with the site leader to use and direct available resources. And then level 3, not only do we have the director or executive director assist with the principal with coordination of their safety plan, but we also liaison with outside agencies if needed. Next slide, please. But there are some areas of concern. And so the thing that we look at is, we lack identified safety teams on campus. Although we're working towards that, we are not quite there yet, but we are working on that on a daily basis. And then our hiring shortage of safety personnel. We have tried really hard to hire for our vacant positions. And we continue to work hard to do that. But nationwide, there is a shortage of staffing or personnel all around. And then we want to get the best person available. And in doing that, sometimes we may interview people that may not be capable of doing the job or may not be a fit for our district. But we are continuing to work on that. Lack of consistent safety equipment and resources across all campuses. We are working on making sure that whether it's safety equipment or emergency packs for our schools, we're making sure that all our schools have those resources available to them. And then looking at greater alignment between our site safety teams and our climate teams and making sure that they are working hand in hand to solve a lot of these issues on site. And then finally, our rollout of our anonymous reporting system. Like I said, we've had WeTip for some time. And with WeTip, we posted on our website, on the district's website, and that is available resource to all our sites. Next slide, please. So with our fidelity walkthrough, we envision that within 45 days, we will have conducted a vulnerability assessment for sites that need assistance with meeting our compliance standard. We will also look at conducting SEPTED assessments. So like I said, that's crime prevention through environmental design, and we make sure that it's done at the secondary as well as the elementary school level. And then impromptu site walks. So when when the safety team does an impromptu site walk, we're looking for the natural environment, meaning that it's not rehearsed, it's not put together. We want to make sure that we are going to a site in its natural state. So we can see if there are issues or something that we can assist that site with. And then schedule and safety training for administrators and staff. Currently, we are doing that. As a matter of fact, I just did a training at an elementary school today for active shooter. So we are doing those trainings for those sites. And then finally, we are looking at surveying, like Ms. Smith said, we are looking at the surveys for students and staff on safety measures that we are implementing and making sure that we are addressing those issues if there are issues with regard to safety. And next slide. So with that, I open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. We are starting with Trustee Smith Folds.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. I have a couple of questions. How often will a site walk happen?
Site walks occur as needed. If we feel that there are some issues that need to be addressed at a site, we will do those site level walks, but it is as needed. And in some cases, we, depending on the site, we frequent those sites quite often.
And does every school have thank you for that. And does every school have a doorbell or a way of seeing who's coming through the door, especially now since some sites are one point of entry and that may be a different point of entry than it was pre-COVID? Does every site have a way of that front door seeing who's coming in?
Are you referring to the front door of the main office, or are you?
Right, so yes, sir. So like for the way that visitors come through the school, or the way that not necessarily teachers that may have a secondary access point, but the way visitors or district staff comes through the door, the way the community comes through the door, is there a way, does every school have a way of knowing or seeing or ringing someone in, or is it just you open the door, you come in, or is it just you have to make a way? I know at Hercules High School, a ring doorbell had to be installed because of the new point of entry. There was no way to see who was coming through the door. Have we looked, does every school have a way of knowing who's coming through the door?
So we have discussed that, and that is a priority of ours, and we are looking at that as an option. Some schools already have them, and some schools we are looking at to put them in place.
Thank you for that. And does every campus have cameras?
No.
And then are yard supervisors at the elementary school level, trained to break up fights, to have conflict mediation, to have the skills that we're requiring of our CSSs?
The level of training for the yard supervisors are not the same as the CSs, but they have a baseline level of training that they can use with regard to conflict mediation and are dealing with fights.
Okay, and then you spoke about 45 days to get into compliance. How many of our sites are not in safety compliance now? Do we have that number?
I don't have that number in front of me, but I can get that to you through the superintendent.
Okay, and then 2 more questions. This We Tip hotline, I've never heard of it since I've been in this district. I would love to know the number. Where is it located? Can you find it on the website? How do we know where this We Tip hotline is? Like, how is it being rolled out? How do we, I didn't know it existed.
Yeah, so we have had signage at our schools in the past. I have a meeting with Phillips Rosen tomorrow where we're going to order a number of signage. We have contacted We Tip, so we're going to get that signage done and placed at schools. It is currently posted on our district website, and the number is 1-800-78-CRIME, CRIME. And that's a number where people can call, they can remain totally anonymous, and that information comes to me as well as other people in the safety team.
Okay, and Mr. Booker, my last question, I want to make sure I have the number right. 1-800-78-CRIME, CRIME. That's our WeTip hotline number, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then you spoke about that all of our campuses are closed campus. Can you speak to what happens in that gap between some of our high schools that have A periods?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yes, sir. So you spoke about us having closed campuses. All of our campuses are closed. Some of our high schools have an A period where there's a gap between when students end A period and when first period begins. They are still to remain on campus, correct? But during that break, or are they allowed to go off campus and come back?
They should be on campus. Until they are completely finished with school, everyone should be on campus, every student.
Thank you so much. Those are my 7.
And I just want to say that we also, on the back of our employee IDs, we have the WeTip number on there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Book. I'm gonna take a look right now because I have 2 of my IDs.
Dr. Hurst wanted to add something.
Yeah, I just want to thank Trustee Smith-Folds for her questions, really good questions. And I just want to say also that a lot of what you was bringing up, Trustee Smith-Folds, it's going to be captured. And I know Mr. Booker and I talked about vulnerability assessments, meaning he said fidelity walkthroughs. I use the term vulnerability assessments, where you're actually going to the school sites and you're looking at these types of gaps. So you talked about gaps in safety or security, cameras, doorbells. We also talked about single point of entry access, how you sign in as well. That all goes into this conversation around what are the vulnerable pieces in each one of our schools. All of that's going to be brought back to the board, and we're going to have to make some decisions on how do we make sure that all of our campuses are safe, looking at that report. So that's going to happen.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Christian?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. The first question would be, for our elementary schools, how are we ensuring the safety of our elementary schools? Because we know we don't have the CSS there. What are we doing to empower the elementary schools?
Thank you for that question, Trustee Christian. As a matter of fact, 4 of the positions that we're going to hire will be dedicated for the elementary schools. So 2 of those out of the 4 that will be considered roving supervisors will be dedicated for the K-8s or the elementary schools. So they will have responsibility for those. They are, as well as Mr. Johnson, Mr. Charles Johnson, being the supervisor for the K-8s. But so we will have people that will be dedicated for those sites.
Okay, and then, just question me, just part is where they've been having a lot of, well, the question is parents coming on to the elementary sites causing a lot of having conflicts with each other, what I'm hearing.
So correct me if I'm wrong. So you're saying parents feuding or fighting against each other or having conflict against each other?
Yeah, I don't want to name the schools, but what I'm hearing.
Okay. So in terms of parent conflict, we want to make sure that our parents understand that this is a school environment. That's not a allowable behavior. So if that is occurring and it disrupts the school environment, we do have recourse. And so we can start it at the district level. If it gets beyond that, then we will call the local police departments.
Okay. And then going back to a question that Trustee Smith-Folds raised was cameras at some of those sites where, like Steve, I just say Steve, you know, they can't tell, you know, who's at the door. You know, so are we gonna wait on getting the camera, or how long does it take, or what do we need to do to get a camera in there? I'm just using that as an example.
So that's something we have to review, and we have to look at when we do our vulnerability assessment, if that is something that can be used for that site to actually help the site. And then we have to look at costs associated with that. Although it's part of safety, that kind of falls into the maintenance and operation area. So I want to be mindful that there are other considerations when you put in cameras in various sites.
Okay, thank you. And then the next one will be in the high schools. You know, there's a lot of you know stuff happening from the community going into the school. So how do we gonna deal with the weapons and different things that shows up or pops up?
So like I said, we have a closed campus policy. We look at limiting the access points for our campuses. And our CSs are trained with regard to dealing with people before they get onto our campus. But it's not just the supervision or the CSs that are responsible for that. It is the responsibility for everybody that is on campus to make sure that if they see something, they should be saying something. And then more important, we need to emphasize to our communities, to our families, that bringing weapons on a school is not only not allowed, but it's against the law. And so we want to make sure that our families have a full understanding of that, as well as our students, making sure that they understand that there are consequences when you bring a weapon on a campus.
Okay, and then this is my last one. My last question is, you know, based on students getting information, how is the principals getting information to students, like holding assemblies or having something to where they can understand the rules?
So you're saying, how are the administrative staff getting this information to the students?
Right.
So based on what I've seen, they're doing it through assemblies where they work with each grade level. They are also emphasizing that during, whether it's through meetings, through various groups, whether it's through communications that is being sent out through the site. They are responsible for getting that information and making sure that their students understand that. And as part of the comprehensive site safety plan, one of the responsibility is to get your school site council involved, as well as community-based organizations, as well as public safety, whether it be fire or the police department.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Christian, thank you so much. Mrs. Reckler?
Thank you. I'd like to come back to the WTIP line. Was that not established under the bond program for one of the recommendations?
Yes, it was. It was one of the recommendations from the forensic investigation.
Okay, so just a small comment, maybe I could save that for later, but for right now, when I think of the WTIP program, phone line for this district, that's what sticks in my head. So it might be helpful for, to describe why you would use this, that it's, all the uses for, when you would call in. So that's just a thought on that. I'm wondering if you can, without giving away too much detail, what the plan would be for the elementaries and the K-8s. I especially have one in my area, which is a lovely school with a lot of landscape and could use some extra eyes. So how do you see that being divvied up, or?
So like I mentioned previously, we are dedicating 2 of our CS supervisors that will be roving. They will have the responsibility for elementaries or K-8s. Charles Johnson, who is the supervisor for that, is also responsible for that. So if they need additional resources, they would go through Mr. Johnson to make sure that, or to see if that is available to them.
And do you envision this by day you're here, or do you envision it by time slot? Are they dropping in unexpected? What do you
So
envision?
there is a schedule that is going to be put in place. And they will have a responsibility for a certain amount of schools. So if we have 38 elementaries, and I'm just using this as an example, they would be split between the 2 as well as the supervisor to make sure that they have a schedule or a cadence that they are committing on a weekly basis.
Okay, thank you. On page 38, sorry. All the positions, I just want to ensure they're all funded with ongoing funds.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And on page 41, it says to conduct a CPTED assessment. Can you just report out what that is?
That is crime prevention through environmental design. So the principles that they would look at is the natural surveillance, natural access control, territorial reinforcement, as well as management and maintenance. So those are the principles that would be used for that assessment.
Okay, thank you. And that's it.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask a few questions based on what I saw and some of what I heard. So I'm going to piggyback on 2 of my colleagues and flat out ask Dr. Hurst, do you believe that Kennedy High School should have cameras like the other high schools?
I absolutely do believe that Kennedy should have cameras in all schools. Yes.
Do we have an idea of when they will be able to get their cameras?
I think that's part of the big question that we just discussed around vulnerability assessments. So part of that is having the team go around to each school and do that assessment. And I think it's going to certainly involve more than cameras. So I think that's one aspect. I think we also heard the possibility of doorbells, looking at other gaps in security, looking at single point of entry as well. Our check-in process as well for our visitors and sign-in process. So all of that needs to happen. And then we come back to the board and then we talk about how we fund those items. So that's going to happen. I'll work with Mr. Booker and his team, and then we can come back to the board on a timeline of when that's going to happen for every school.
Okay. Can we pull up slide 40? Please. I just heard my wife tell me to say please. I heard her in my head. Okay, let's see. Lack of identified safety teams on campus. Can you please unpack that?
As best I can. So when I say that is, so I don't know if you remember this earlier in the year, I talked about having a safety team, and it's kind of a safety / climate team at each site. And so some sites have done a good job of putting those together, but there's some sites that are still working on building that team out. So the sites that need assistance with that, we're going to those sites and helping them, myself and LaShante Smith. But we're making sure that each site has a climate safety team that will meet twice per month. And then they will meet once per month with our district staff to report out issues or concerns that they have at those campuses.
Thank you. Can we please pull up slide 36? It's not, I'm sorry, it's not this one. There's one that has alcohol and drug intervention on it. I thought that was 36, but it's not. Yep, close, I was close. Can you please talk about what the alcohol and drug problems are that we're facing and what the intervention is?
I'll have Ms. Smith speak to that.
So from our data so far, the biggest drug problem that we're seeing on our campuses is vaping and marijuana.
And what is the intervention and prevention?
So we have community-based organizations on campuses that are doing what you would call a brief alcohol and drug intervention, which is a therapeutic intervention for substance abuse. But this slide is talking about increasing partnerships with specific agencies for substance abuse and going back to thinking about how are we using other young people to discourage, especially around vaping, the use of vaping on campuses. And so that's what that slide, that point is talking about. In the past, I don't know if you're aware of TUPE, but it's the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program, and they use other peers to discuss the use of nicotine on campuses, but they've expanded their curriculum to specifically address vaping and also the use of marijuana in young people.
Thank you very much. There were several callers who spoke about school resource officers. Dr. Hurst, do you have an opinion about using school resource officers? Or if you do, can you share your thoughts, if you have any thoughts about that?
So I would say, honestly, we have discussed school resource officers as a team. I think what we want to do and what we've decided is that we really want to engage in the conversation with them and see what role, if any, they will play in the safety and security of our campus. I know also just coming here new that there's a lot of context, historical context. So I know it's going to be a larger conversation, and I'm wanting to engage in the community in that conversation as well. I will say, based on my past experience, I have had extremely positive experiences in other places I've been with SROs. which is why I did share with my team, I'm very interested in engaging that conversation. So to answer your question, yes, I certainly want to engage in the conversation, but I realize that it's a bigger conversation than just talking about SROs and just meeting with chiefs. It's a community conversation.
Why isn't that part of the next steps? Or why is that not included in this?
I think we decided that we wanted to do more research for one. And then also, I did ask the team to really just focus on what we're doing currently, what we have planned for the future, and our next steps in those two areas, physical safety and social emotional safety. I think we also understand and realize that if we bring up certain topics, I understand we have to bring up certain topics eventually, but we wanted it to be about this presentation. And the second we start talking about anything else, that's a bigger conversation. And as I shared, it's really a community conversation as well. So we opted not to put it on this agenda.
Okay. That's 7 questions for me. We can go to the next part of the presentation.
So thank you. So this is now discussing what trainings we are offering as a system to support school climate, specifically thinking about the social, emotional, and behavioral function of our students and safety. So every month, our school leaders, our principals meet, and that's every first Tuesday of the month. And there's dedicated time now embedded within those principals meetings to discuss social emotional learning and school climate. And the focus is really on PBIS, restorative practices, other means of correction, and school discipline issues. And then our sites, about 2-3 weeks ago, created site level SEL goals. And so at those meetings monthly, we'll be reviewing their progress toward their goals in the areas of social emotional learning. In addition, we are now going to be offering teacher monthly training that will be done where all teachers can attend, and we're encouraging principals to attend with their teachers. And the monthly training will be focused on building relationships and community in the classroom, positive behavior supports, how to identify students in need of intervention and how to support those students. And then also, again, emphasizing social and emotional learning. There are already Kane trainings that took place. And these were mandated trainings, 6 hours of mandated trainings that varied from issues like bullying, suicide prevention, and other behavior issues. And then with our campus safety specialists, they have already started trainings that happen monthly. And again, the focus is on restorative practices, mental health, adolescent mental health, and then conflict mediation. And those links were clickable, so you can open up if you so decide. So as far as climate safety needs and next steps in regards to physical safety, improve our district-wide mobile radio systems, add portable radios, the buzzer systems for the main office doors, improve the electronic surveillance systems at our secondary sites, really improve our anonymous system reporting rollout to ensure that all stakeholders know what that system is and how to use it and access it, and then improve our visitor management systems by implementing a paperless version. And then for the social emotional realm of things is we're continuing, and we're doing this now, auditing our current partnerships. I spoke earlier but we need to make sure that our partnerships are aligned to the data that we're seeing, because we want partners on our campuses supporting the behaviors that we're seeing on our campuses. Again, this is in the process right now, having staffing assigned to schools to support behaviors. So more folks on the ground doing direct interventions with students. And then continued time and continued time and investment in professional development that's centered around restorative healing and trauma-informed practices. So we've called this out as a need, but as a system, continuing to together move in the same direction toward making sure that all of our stakeholders are trained in these practices and have the tools that they need to support students. And then lastly, ensuring that the teams are in place to support this infrastructure on our campuses, and then that we have that centralized team as well. Next slide, please. Questions?
Trustee Smith-Folds?
So I have a couple of questions. Are these SEL goals going to be shared out to teachers, the community? Are they going to be shared out to the SSCs, to the climate teams? When sites establish these SEL goals, where do they then go?
The site level SEL goals?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, they should be shared out to the community and all stakeholders, to the PTA, to the SSC, to the ELACs. Everyone should know about the site goals.
And where does race and equity fit into climate and safety?
Race and equity is embedded in everything that we do. So everything, I know for a fact that everything that we're doing in regards to social emotional learning has the race and equity lens. And it's about how are we making these lessons and ensuring that these lessons are also culturally relevant. And when we think about social emotional learning, I spoke earlier about disproportionality, but we're really taking a serious look at our disproportionality in this district. We've been disproportionate for a while. And so again, we want to make sure that we're supporting African-American students, because that is our disproportionate ethnic group, in meeting social emotional goals and providing that subgroup with additional supports to meet goals. So it's really embedded in what we're doing in regards to social emotional and behavior support.
Thank you for that. And then when are these PD trainings happening, and are teachers being compensated for these trainings?
So we have a training calendar that we're starting. So they will be monthly. They are voluntary trainings, so teachers will not be compensated.
And then which sites don't have their safety teams already up and running or set up yet? Do we know specifically?
Mr. Booker?
We are currently working on that list. Like I said, we can get you that information through the superintendent.
Thank you. And those were 4 questions. Mr. Phillips, can I ask the other ones, or can I go ahead and fill up my 7 with other questions that were throughout the presentation?
So what I think we're going to be able to do is if you're done with this, I think we will be able to loop back and kind of do a sweep. So if you could just hold, if it's not on this, that would be great.
I'm gonna hold you to that, sir. Thank you. That's it for this one.
Christian?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the question I want to kind of go back to is the counselors that we do have, or the psychologists. How many African Americans do we have that are psychologists?
We have approximately 3 African-American school psychologists.
And do we know where they're located? I mean, what schools, or is it at the district office, or where?
I can get you the list of schools where they're located. I know if you want to wait, I can get you the schools where they're located.
Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Reckler?
I just have 2 questions. The first one is that this conversation on the school resource officers reminded me of trustee Christian said, we had that conversation back in late spring about a handful of sports games that are very high profile. Do we have coverage for those, or are you looking at additional support for them?
So we cover our games with our current staffing, our CSs. And that is based on information that we put out early in the week so we can have enough personnel. Because we have supervisors on those sites, they are responsible for example, if there's a game, Kennedy against Pinot, and it's at Kennedy, the site supervisor at Kennedy has the responsibility of getting the personnel for that game. If he can't achieve the number of people that he needs for that game, then he would reach out to Director Franco and Charles Johnson to get those additional resources. So we are filling those with our CSs. We do notify the police department that we have games like this, and they assist us on a peripheral level. They are not actually at the field, but they do help us in certain areas regarding traffic, vehicle traffic.
Okay, my recollection of that conversation is that it was a little bit, that there's a handful of hot games, and if you don't know what those are, he should tell you, and we should make sure that there's coverage. So I'll just leave it at that. The other question is, and I think this is the final one, is what is the intended report out schedule for all, for everything discussed tonight, and what, and you know, the metrics that you plan to report out on? And that's probably the Dr. Hurst.
So we've been having that conversation. This is really for all the board members. It ties into the superintendent goals. I had this conversation also with the solutions team as well. And part of the conversation I think we also talked about is how does the equity audit play into it? What we're waiting for is to really see the outcome of the equity audit, fold that into the superintendent goals, and then come back to the board with that metric. I think we talked about that in our closed session. So we have an initial timeline of towards the end of November, which is what we said, that we would come back to the board with those superintendent goals. Make sure that the board is good with those goals, but then go back to the organization and start working on that matrix. We don't really have a timeline. I think I shared with you, that's the big part of the work. We actually sit down and look at those indicators, look at those targets. I think I'll have a better sense after I start going to the organization. So if you can just give me a little time to come back to the board on that one.
Yeah,
I appreciate
sure.
it. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we please go to the next steps slide? I think it's 46. So when I look at the bullets under safety, it all has to do with some kind of technology, but it doesn't have anything to do with people. And so my question is, technology is great, but it's only as good as the people who are using it. So how do people, whether it's classified, whether it's teachers, whether it's volunteers, whether it's yards, how do people fold into that?
That's a very good question, President Phillips. And I will say that with any technology, there's a certain amount of training that goes along with that. We are looking at other resources in terms of personnel, but that is something that has to be allocated and funded. And so with the technology, we are making sure that any technology that we get, that people are properly trained, if that answers your question. It was a very good question, so I want to make sure I answered it correctly.
It does. And so the people portion, you're saying that the funding for that needs to be allocated. So what is it that you're saying the board needs to, because what you're really saying is you need money. That's how I translate that. So what are you saying that the board needs to do, in your opinion, as far as funding is concerned, to actually make our schools the environments that they need to be? And I know that there's, you know, the emotional safety and the physical safety, and I know that they're related. And so right now I'm talking about the physical portion of it, and I'll talk about the emotional portion of it as well. But the physical part of it, because I just heard you say, well, there's some things we want to do, but they have to be funded. So what are those things, and what do you need?
Well, I mean, if you look up there, those are things that have to be funded. They have to be paid for. I mean,
But I was specifically, we're talking about the people portion, because you said the people that we're trying to do some personnel and they need to be funded. What are you talking about?
so I'm talking about specifically, like, you know, the CS position. If there were, or we were looking at additional personnel, that would be the lens that I would be looking through, is through the safety officer's position. At the lower levels, maybe some assistance. And I don't want to talk about additional teachers and stuff like that, but making sure that they had somebody that was trained and understands the process that we're trying to lay out. And I know I kind of danced around your question there, but
A little bit.
and you know, I'm not the one that makes that decision in terms of funding and personnel. But I would say that with regard to some of that, you probably would need at some point some additional personnel.
Those are my questions on that slide. And that's the end of the presentation, right?
That is correct.
So what I'm going to do is we're going to do a kind of a sweep, because we still haven't had any discussion from the board, which we're going to have. But board members, if you have any final questions or something that you missed, you know, in one of the presentations in the beginning, just something that you need to clean up, I'm going to ask you to ask 4 more questions. You don't have to, but if you do have some additional cleanup, please ask 4 more, and then we're going to move to the discussion. So Trustee Smith-Folds, we're starting with you.
So close, President Phillips. I have 5 more questions. It was so close to 4, but let me just see what these should be quick. What is the name of the county program for grades 7 through 12? It was mentioned, but the name of the program wasn't mentioned.
Golden Gate.
Golden Gate. Oh, thank you. I think it maybe was mentioned. I missed it, LaShante or Miss Smith. Did I hear that special ed funds are being used to support some of these programs?
You did.
Okay, and then are admin in the training, the planning, or the implementation process of all of the discipline matrix and the safety and the SEL? Are we including admin in the planning, the training, and the implementation of all of these?
Yes, and in regards to the discipline matrix, when that was originally created, admin were at the table co-creating that matrix.
Have we revisited with admin?
We have not revisited with admin, but actually as part of our CCEIS progress reporting, we hope to gather all of the data that we're seeing in regards to students returning to school, continue to look at the behavior, and then think about, are there additional revisions that need to be made to that matrix? And at that time, that's when we would really bring all stakeholders back to the table, including admin and community, to talk about what we're seeing. In the past, we called that the Positive School Climate Working Group. So we haven't abandoned that. We still want to bring all stakeholders back to the table, including, like I said, community, our CSSs, our teachers, our admin, to really think about our discipline matrix.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Booker, how are CSSs allocated? Like, what's the difference between, are we looking at, so a school that has 1,600 students is going to get a different number than a school that has 1,000 students? Can you walk me through a little bit how that allocation process happens, and if there needs to be any kind of revision to that at all?
So there is a rubric that we use that includes school population, as well as number of incidents that have occurred on the campus, the location of the campus. So those are some of the things that we use. And as far as additional personnel, those are conversations that we have quite frequently. And if we feel that there is a need, we push that forward to see if it can be allocated in the CSS program.
Thank you.
That was 5.
That was 6, but thank you very much. Trustee Christian.
Yeah, thank you. I think just one I just needed with the online schooling. Saying with you have students that disrupted students, so forth, would they be considered like for online school as an option?
So I'm just going to repeat the question to make sure I heard it correctly. So will students who exhibit different behavior problems on their current campus be considered for virtual academy?
Yeah.
No. But we do have, for students specific to COVID, for students who are not following COVID protocols, we do have short-term independent study options for those students.
Okay, thank you.
Can we please turn to slide 32? I hope this is the right slide. This is the right slide. So there's 2 slides. There's this slide, and then there's another slide that is a counterpart to this slide, but it's in the physical presentation. And I don't remember what the title of the other one was, but it's essentially the same slide, just for the other one. So I know that Trustee Reckler asked about timelines. And I know you probably can't map this out this evening, but my question is really twofold. So it's 2 questions. So the first question is, well, I guess it's when are you going to do all these things? I mean, that's really what the question is. So it's this one and it's the one for Booker. So it's really 2. When are you going to do all these things?
That's a great question. So the first step is getting staff, because right now in our Office of School Climate, there is one person, me. So the first step is getting staff, which is we are hiring for now. The second step is we do have a lofty goal that by the end of the first semester, which would be January 14th, that we would do those fidelity walkthroughs on every campus using the TFI and an observation tool to see what is actually on campuses to support students and to what level of implementation or to what level of fidelity those processes have been implemented. And so then at that point, we'd be able to report back, because that would be a whole district needs kind of analysis by school and really doing some deep resource mapping.
And in the resource mapping, is that kind of an audit of what we currently have or what we need, or is it both?
Both. So what we currently have, and then what we have doesn't match the needs. And if it doesn't match the need, then what do we need?
Those are my questions. Thank you very much to you all for the presentation. I want to take a couple of minutes. Several months ago, there was a national school safety conference in San Antonio. And Trustee Christian is actually the only person from our district that attended. So because of the topic that we're discussing tonight, I wanted to give him a few minutes, to just talk about what he experienced down there in San Antonio and what lessons he learned, and to have an opportunity to kind of bring those back. So Trustee Christian.
Yeah, thank you, President Phillips. Just to recapture on the trip that I attended in San Antonio, Texas, it was back in July, and where I was able to be with people from all over the country, that's from all high schools, elementary schools, middle schools, and they discussed the climate of safety, what's going on, the reality of things, and how things are constantly increasing, daily. And one of the key things they mentioned is that you have to be proactive, not reactive. And a lot of times we become reactive, but we're not proactive. And proactive is being on it, on a daily basis. We have to approach safety, emotional, physical, the whole thing, because we care about our kids, we care about our young people. We want our young people to make it and be successful. So, and then staff, everybody, everybody plays a part. And it takes everybody to make things happen. But what I learned a lot down there, but it's going to take money. It's going to take money. And you talk about the technology and a lot of the stuff that we don't have, that we're so antiquated out. We so far behind on a lot of stuff. And some of the demonstrations they were showing of the modern stuff to use at the high school or the middle school or the elementary school, but it's going to take money. So, but the conference was very powerful, and I would suggest that some of this CSS, to attend these conference, and some of the principals from here and some of the people from here to attend. I was the only board member that was there, but I was there with law enforcement. I was there with staff from other schools, but I was the only board member that was there. But that was my role, was safety. And so I know about safety. So, and that's what I spent my years in, working in safety. So, so we got a lot to do, but I appreciate this tonight, because this right here, because it's on everybody's heart, and it's on everybody's mind, is to see our district improve, making sure the safety of everybody, the kids, everybody, well-being is taken care of. Because everybody has a heart and a care and concern. And so tonight, I'm thankful that we had this, and want to thank all the staff that brought forth all the information and all the things that we can have this dialogue on improving our district. And so, but yeah, the trip was a blessing to me, but it would be a blessing to some of the others, campus safety staff here, to be able to attend those conferences, and some of the principals or so forth.
Thank you, Trustee Christian, for sharing your experience at the conference with the rest of us. So board, we are going to have some discussion about what we heard. There are 4 of us, and so we have enough time to do this. I'm going to put a timer on so we can all do it, but I'm going to put 10 minutes on for each person. And in that 10 minutes, for you to say whatever it is that is on your heart or on your mind about this topic that we gathered here to discuss on this evening. So Trustee Smith-Folds, and this 10 minutes is not the closing comments. So at the end of the meeting, when we have board comments, you'll be able to make your board comments too. So you're gonna get a twofer, but Trustee Smith-Folds, you're first. And when you start, I'll hit go.
Mr. Phillips, circle back around to me, please.
Okay. Trustee Christian?
I'm gonna come back to the board comments.
Okay, so I'm circling back around. I'm circling back around to, all right. Trustee Reckler.
Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for this presentation tonight. It was very interesting and I learned a lot, and it was really good. One of the first things that comes to my mind is around these doorbells and these cameras at the front doors. And we've been hanging out at King, giving them a little support at lunch, and it's ridiculous what you have to do. You come up to the door, you bang on the door, I hold up my tag so that somebody can see me, and then they have to come out of the office and walk all the way around and come out and open the door for you. So we are wasting staff time simply, but I mean, this woman just walks, somebody from the office is just getting up and walking out and opening the door all day long. So that is not a good use of people's time. So a bell there, I don't even think they need a camera because they can see, but that this is really helpful and will actually improve the work that gets done. So I think that is actually a priority. So just to think about that. I've used the Facilitron system. I don't love it, but it works for me actually. And so maybe that could be used also as a volunteer system. It's not as seamless as I would think it is, but it's easy to check. You scan, you check in, you check out. So I use it when I go to sites, when I remember and I see the QR code. Otherwise I sign in. Good luck getting every student to wear a lanyard, but I know you can do it. I know you can. It's just discipline and practice. I do this from years of working where I had to have, of course I had to have a key to get in and out, but they would not let anybody into the building unless you had your ID on it. So it's totally possible that that can get done. I am open to the school resource officer discussion for sure. I saw a lot of positive things happen on the El Cerrito campus. I'm not close to that discussion. I'm careful about it, but I don't have a problem with bringing something back if it's not working. I see them as partners. The other thing is just in general, I'm hoping that you're going to include students wholly and deeply on these climate teams at every grade level. They can tell you how they feel about campus. And I hope that they are really included because they will tell you exactly what they feel, what they see, what they want to see, what they feel like, and it's all about them. So I'm hoping for their deep involvement. And then this also isn't anything we can't do. We just need a plan. It needs to be prioritized and it needs to be budgeted and then reviewed over time at, figure out what the metrics are and then reviewed over time to see if you hit it and readjust it. So it's totally possible that that basically everything gets done. So that's where I leave that. And thank you.
Trustee Reckler, you got 6 minutes and 40 seconds left. You done for real?
I don't have anything else. Thank you.
Okay, okay. All right, so because we were looping back around, Trustee Smith Folds, we're back to you.
I think a lot of this feels like there's a lot of support that needs to be given at the district level, like a lot of support that needs to be given at the district level. I think that the presentation was a lot like what I think about myself in my mind. In my mind, I'm still 20 and 100 pounds, but in reality, that's not what's happening. And I want us to focus on the reality and how we can support the reality that's happening on our campus. We can't have one person shouldering all of this work. We can't have, Mr. Booker needs an entire safety team. There needs to be an entire team around looking at all aspects of safety every day on our campuses, not just one person who's now doing COVID and the safety that goes with COVID and the safety that goes without COVID. The issues that we had before we left campus and now are compounded when we're back on campus. He needs an entire team. I think it's just a reality. Again, I think that if we are going to get even a little bit of what we have listed on that presentation done, we have to put the human people behind it, the human resources behind it. I think that we have to be more boots on the ground, the walkthroughs, the pop-ups, the ensuring that we have the correct information about what's happening. And we have to listen to the community. I mean, we had callers come in talking to us specifically about school sites saying this is what's happening. So we need to be attuned to that. And then we send out a team. As soon as we hear it, we send out a team. The we tip line, it needs to be promoted. We need to say, hey, this is how you can tell us what's going on campuses. We need to make sure that we include our student trustees and not just our student trustees, but our students on every part of the campus saying what is happening here, because the kids know better than we will ever know. The same thing with the teachers. We need to make sure the teachers, we're doing implementable plans, things that are actually going to happen on our campus. And if not, we need to manage our expectations. I think it's absolutely crazy that Kennedy doesn't have cameras. I'm stunned that one of our high schools does not have cameras on the campus. I think our K-8s should have cameras. I think our middle schools should have cameras. I think that's a first step in mitigation, is we cannot depend on the kids and their videos to tell us what happened on our campuses. We need to have eyes in the sky and see what's happening on our campuses ourselves. I think that that's something that we need to put as top priority. I think climate, I think you cannot talk about climate without talking about race and equity. We spent a whole year centering race and equity, and then it's like it's gone. That has to remain as the center. When we open our mouths, we talk about race and equity. We just saw it again. A school full of Black and brown children doesn't have cameras in it. That's a race and equity issue. That's an equity issue that this school doesn't have cameras in it. It's an equity issue that we have, kids are having different experiences on different campuses and they have a different feeling of what safety is. We need to talk to our communities. We need to have a working definition of what safety is. We need to have the trainings and give time for the trainings. I don't know how many people on here have ever filled out a referral. It is not a quick process. Filling out a referral is not something that happens very quickly, and you're trying to do it while you're managing a class and dealing with a student. We have to have that real-time conversation with our teachers and have them at the table. What works best for you? How do we ensure that you are able to do the job that's required of you, and how can we help you when it comes to discipline? We need to talk to our admin staff. What part of the matrix is implementable and what part just can we not do at all? We have to include cyber violence when we're talking about violence. These kids now are more technology astute than we will ever be. They will come to school mad because of something they saw on social media at 7 o'clock in the morning. And then you have a kid who's upset the entire day because their phone made them mad, or something that happened on their phone made them mad. We have to catch up to what's happening on our campuses now. The SEL learning, I want to be sure that it's actually happening. We need the space to ensure, and the checks and balances to ensure everything that we want to happen is actually happening on the campuses, and then put in that support if it's not going on there. Our community knows what schools and what sites are having the safety issues. They know it. We all know it. So we need to start acting on the knowledge that we already have. I'm interested to seeing more school psychologists on campus. LaShante or Ms. Smith, you said there's 3 school psychologists that are African-American. I would like to know further demographics. How many of our school psychologists speak Spanish? How many of our school psychologists are hitting the demographics of the students that we're serving? I think that comes to the equity in hiring practices. That speaks to, are we hiring people who are able to represent the community of the students that we teach? We have to look at all of that. Again, I think that goes to our climate. The fact that we're talking about, does every school have the doorbell and a way of seeing? That's, again, high priority. That's a lift that we need to be able to put our resources behind to make sure that the beginning of the entrance into the school is safe. I really want to concentrate on our yard supervisors. Mr. Booker, I would love for them to have some training, because we do depend on them on the elementary school sites. On the elementary school sites that don't have CSSs, we're depending on our principals, we're depending on our custodians, we're depending on our secretaries to go out there and to handle and manage those student conflict and those student interactions. And yes, we depend on our yard supervisors, who may be parent volunteers at some of our sites. They may be employees of the district, but they do need to have that training. I think we also need to ensure that we're training our substitutes that come to the school and making sure that they understand our safety protocol, the safety standards that we have, the norms that we have when they go to the campuses. They too affect the climate of our schools. Let's see. Ms. Smith, I want to see what we can do about compensating for training. Our teachers have a lot on their plates. Our teachers have a lot that they're dealing with this year, especially. And if we want them to have the training that we're ensuring that they need to make sure that they're doing their highest and best self, then it needs to be some level of compensation. I really want to know which sites don't have their safety teams and how we can support those sites in their safety teams and getting their climate and safety teams up and running, getting their SSTs up and running, ensuring that they have all of the supports that they need on their campuses. Our APACs, our ELACs, all of those things, our SSCs, all of these other parts, our PTAs and PTOs, they all play into climate. So we need to make sure that they all have the support that they need. And I think that may be it. I want to thank you for the presentation. I hope that this is just a first presentation, not a last presentation on safety. I hope we get an update. As soon as there's some movement, we continuously have updates to the board about how we are centering safety and climate on our school campuses, because there's nothing without the safety and the climate of the students. How much do I have left, Mr. Phillips?
2 minutes and 23 seconds.
Great, I'll continue.
Go ahead.
Also, what was that?
I said, go ahead.
Okay. I also want to go to when we were talking about trauma-informed practices. I want to make sure that trauma-informed practices go past our teachers and it also hits our CBOs. So when we have CBOs on campuses and they are working with our children, they too need to have some trauma-informed practices skills, because they see our children at different levels than the teacher may see them, maybe after school when a kid is able to have a little bit of downloading and they can talk. I also think our parents need to have some training on what to look for in their own child and their children's friends. What do you look for to say, what are the red flags that you can come out and say, this child needs some help? When we're talking about our tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, I really do want parents implemented at all of those levels, because we cannot do this without parents, guardians. Our community has extended family that helps raise the children. So we need to involve everyone in making sure that we're wrapping around each and every one of our students. I want to make sure that every kid has a trusted adult that they can go to on campus. We have ways of doing that and knowing that. We need to ask, and then we need to make sure that those students who don't have a trusted adult, that we find one for them. Every kid needs to have someone that they can be able to talk to outside and inside their homes. Mr. Phillips, my time.
You have 44 seconds.
I think I'll end there. Thank you, Ms. Smith, for the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Booker, for the presentation. Thank you, Dr. Hurst. I appreciate it. 40, maybe 20 seconds. I am concerned about where this money is coming from with special ed. I don't want us to keep glossing over that. Like, how are we using special ed money, and are we doing it the way that we're supposed to be doing it? That gives me a little bit of unease when we say that we're using money outside of what's allocated just for our special ed students. So I do want to talk about that at some point. That's it. Thank you.
9 seconds left. All right. Trustee Christian. No, this is your comments on the presentation, and the topic is safety.
Thank you. Just want to just say, we have a lot to do. And it's a matter of just how we get it, how do we, step-by-step process of making this, happen on our school sites. I just want to say, Trustee Reckler, myself, was at Kane School and spent maybe 2 hours. And yeah, it's a lot that needs to happen, but we engage the students and so forth. And it's just a lot just need to happen. So, but based on the presentation, we just have a lot to just work on, and we got to get there. So that's pretty much, that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christian. I'm going to start this over for myself. So first, I want to thank you all for the presentation. I know that there's a lot going on, and compiling all of this information for us is not easy. So I want to just say thank you very much for that. The first thing that I want to talk about from the presentation is the positive school climate resolution. That work is extremely important work. So it was very interesting for me to hear you, Ms. Smith, talk about what has worked and what hasn't. And I'm very thankful that you are candid about what has worked and what hasn't, because it is imperative, just as it was before, just as it has been for generations, that we actually do this work. So I do very much look forward to this resource audit that you're going to be doing to map out what we have and what we don't have and what we need. And it is something that definitely does need to come back to the board, because I think what happens is we have this conversation. Everybody has this conversation, right, about the environment that we learn and teach in. But then, and everybody has at some point something negative to say about it. But the work that needs to be done to move it in the direction that everybody wants it to be in, it's this work that we're talking about tonight. And so it's imperative. It's imperative that we do this work. It's imperative that we have a partnership with our educators to where we are not disagreeing about whether social emotional learning is actually going to be taught. Because if we talk about the kids and we talk about how they behave, but then when it comes time to teach them the right way, we don't do it because it's not in a contract, then what are we really doing? What are we really achieving? And can we even blame the kids if we don't take the time to teach them? I don't think we can. If my son or my daughter, or my sons or my daughter, they act out and I haven't taken the time to actually teach them and show them then I'm just as culpable, if not more, than they are. And so this whole thing is really a partnership, and it does fall on everybody in the organization to make sure that our kids are being taught the right way. And that's book learning, but that's also life skills. That's also how to interact with one another in a positive way. There were a lot of things that were on the slides about what needs to be done still, areas of concern. As you guys are working on all of this, Dr. Hurst, and I'm not trying to put more on anybody than they realistically can do. And I know that this is not work that can be done overnight. Like, this is long, hard work, right? But, you know, we didn't start yesterday, right? This is something that we've been at for a while now. And so it's really important that we do put timelines, you know, on these things, so we know that we're getting them done, because when we get them done, we will have a better learning environment for our entire community. I want to talk a little bit about police on schools, because it's come up a few times tonight. Personally, I believe that sporting events and special events, I believe that having law enforcement presence there, I think it's a no-brainer. I know some folks may disagree with that, but I really do think that they need to be there. And I think that not having them there places folks in jeopardy. I think it places kids in jeopardy. I think it places staff, parents, visitors. It's just not, in my opinion, a smart move. And that doesn't mean that they need to be present for every sporting event or every special event. But there are some that it is nonsensical to not have them at. And so that's my opinion on that. As far as school resource officers outside of games, but on campus, we have had this conversation in some form or fashion for quite some time. Dr. Hurst, what I heard this evening is that your team is researching this issue. And so when you are done researching this issue and you guys are comfortable with whatever information that you are looking at, you need to bring it back to the board to have that conversation, whatever your recommendation is. Tonight, this is not any kind of vote on anything. It's a general discussion. But I do believe very strongly as the superintendent, you know, your role, part of your role anyway, is to make recommendations to the board. So anything that you guys left out of this presentation, whether it is school resource officers or anything else that you left out for whatever reason you left out, needs to come back. And whether that is physical or social, emotional, but if there's something that you guys are still working on, still working through, Harbor Way, for example, if there's something that you guys are still doing and processing, this is not meant to be the end of a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation, and we need your best thinking, and we need your best work. And then, so I talked about kind of police or law enforcement at games, and I just spoke about SROs basically on campus. But then I want to talk about one other thing very briefly. Whether there are SROs or not, I do think that there is a benefit to positive relationships with police officers. And I think that there are programs And particularly, I'm thinking about a program in the city of San Pablo where it's not an SRO thing, but they do have, and I can't remember the name of it, but where they do have police officers who interact with kids. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that is a positive thing in a structured program. So regardless of what the ultimate decision is, if there are programs like that, and some of us, we age ourselves, or even we talk about DARE, for example, I would never say that I wouldn't support a DARE program because it has to do with the police. I would never say that I would not support the Police Activities League because it has to do with the police. There are positive interactions that children are able to have. And I think that that's fine. And I think if there are departments or cities that want that in their area, it's fine. And it's something that I personally would support. But as far as the overall thing, when you guys are ready to come back with whatever other recommendations or things that you're working on, Dr. Hurst, let me know and we will agendize it and follow up with wherever you guys are. So I have a minute left. I am done. I do want to say thank you to all of you because I do think that this was very helpful. And I think it's something that folks need to see. One of the things that I did not hear this evening, though, and it came up, was there have been conversations, emails, thoughts around weapons getting onto campus. And I did not really hear anything about stopping that or how we stop that. So when the presentation does come back, I think that that is something that I would like to hear addressed. And I think it's something that other folks would like to hear addressed as well. So with that, I have 10 seconds and I'm done. Thank you very much. And this item is now closed. So now we're going to go to item D, which is comments from the Board of Education and future agenda items. What I wanted to do very quickly is give Dr. Hurst a little bit of time to talk about the agenda items and how we're structuring them and why. He mentioned this, I think, in one of our previous board meetings, but I want him to be able to kind of reiterate it because I want everybody to understand what we're doing right now and why we are doing it around the mission critical work. So Dr. Hurst, can you just talk a little bit about the agenda?
Absolutely. So last board meeting, I shared with the board and the public that we have many things to focus on in our district. And I outlined probably about 10 to 12 different things that we consider mission critical. And we define mission critical as those items that we're working on. That's part of the normal operations that's going to keep us running as well. Part of the main focus since we started the school year has been COVID response. That's certainly a mission critical work in looking at our testing protocols, our contact tracing protocols, our notification processes, and our cleaning protocols. We also have been focusing on staffing, and I shared at the last board meeting that a key area is certainly our TK classrooms and aides, our teachers and custodial staff. Another piece of the mission critical work has certainly been a virtual academy and making sure that we're servicing the needs of all of our students. And again, I shared about 10 to 12 different items that were considered mission critical. And what we have decided to do, and I brought this to the board, is that we would bring 3 items at a time. So part of the superintendent report, for an example, we would talk about COVID response, or we'll talk about communication, or talk about staffing. 3 items at a time we'll bring to the board for conversation, for questions, and for discussion. And that's really how we're framing all of our board meetings. until everything is up and running. And then we said we would take on more items that certainly the board is interested in taking on. So that's really the framework of our board meetings. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hurst. Trustee Smith Folds, comments. These are the closing comments, by the way.
Thank you, everyone. So in lieu of hearing what Dr. Hurst just said, so I'm going to, these are my agenda items, but I will say that these are now what I would like to have special meetings around, or a way of handling and talking about these items as well. The adult school, we still need to have conversations surrounding the adult school. Now that conversation also includes any closure of senior programs that may happen at the adult school level. We need to have conversations around trade school opportunities. Again, if these cannot fall inside the agenda, I would like to request that we have special meetings to talk about all of these items. Period poverty. We know that we have now had laws in order, so we need to make sure that we are providing the necessary things for our students around period poverty. Standing reports still need to be discussed. Dress codes still need to be discussed. Numerical literacy and overall literacy gaps and strategies. The equity statement and the equity enforcement still needs to be discussed. Public comment still needs to happen. Revision of the bylaws and the governance handbook. We are talking about our preschool and our TKAs, the transition program inclusion, a standalone item of virtual school, just talk specifically about every aspect of virtual school and the virtual school education we're providing for the students, remote working. We need to talk about report cards and how we're asking our elementary schools to report on our students and their progress and success. Vaccine implementation needs to be discussed. Mental and emotional health of all students and educators needs to be discussed. Accessible drinking water for all students, making sure that all students have the fundamental civil rights of having accessible water on their campuses. We need to talk about making sure that we're having full transparency among all of our sites and what the information is being brought back to the board. And finally, because we just talked about safety tonight, I want to ensure that we're still having a standard for safety for all of our schools that should include cameras, doorbells, and the proper training for all staff that are dealing with our students. Again, I understand the critical mission work, so I'm asking that these get to us in a different way. Special meetings, board retreats, however we can have these conversations along with the work that we're doing with COVID response. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it and have a good night.
Christian?
Yes, I thank you. And I just wanted to thank all the staff and all those who have worked diligently and hard up to this point here. And for the safety meeting tonight. And also I wanna say thank you to all the staff in the district, to everybody, because everybody's been pouring their hearts, working hard in their school sites, trying to make sure things are running smoothly. We have a lot to accomplish, which we see the layout of the land, of a lot of the information that was given tonight, which we got to stay on target, stay on course to make sure that we provide the needs for our schools for to make sure things are running smoothly. So we have a lot to do. Time is moving. I want to make sure, I just want to touch on the sports, like you be able to go to games, and you got, the games are safe, without having major problems. So it's a lot of things we just got to work on, and I believe we're going to get there. But we just have to just, stay focused and stay moving. And that's pretty much. Thank you.
Reckler?
So once again, thank you for tonight's presentation. And then once again, just another reminder that with a good plan that's prioritized and budgeted and laid out properly with the proper metrics and the proper checkpoints along the way, we can do this. It's just a matter of planning and prioritizing. So there's that. I also want to say that I completely support a very tight agenda, only focusing on mission critical work. We are just turning the lights on in the mothership after a year and a half. This is not the most nimble organization, and we are where we are. We are still in crisis. We are still creeping out of a worldwide pandemic. Here, it's still raging overseas. So all we need to do is concentrate on getting the lights back on after a year and a half. Honestly, I've always had in my head that this was going to take until at least January to get straightened out. I hadn't even planned anything past January, honestly, because I knew that this was going to be the mission of just getting back into the swing of things after a year and a half. Two things that I do think need to come back on the mission critical work is I do think next boarding we need a virtual school update, and I think we need to start front loading the vaccine mandate and comments and work around that. I also want to thank, I'm going to butcher your name, I'm sure. I'm going to thank and welcome Mr. Tanischek to Team WCCUSD. We're glad you're here. I would like to recommend that the superintendent or your designee reach out to Valley View, and the first speaker who spoke here in person, and find out which school his children attend so that they can get a little love. And finally, I want to recognize that it is National School Lunch Week. And once again, I want to thank our food service workers who have tirelessly supported our students and the whole community since the start of the pandemic. And I don't even know how many millions of meals it was. I think I left off at 15 million. So thank you and good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to reiterate why it is important for us to focus on mission critical work right now. We are severely understaffed as an organization, and there are a lot of things that we could spend our time on, that we want to spend our time on, and many of those things are very important, but we just don't have the resources at this time. And if we divert the resources that we do have to things that are not mission critical, we actually run the risk of severely damaging our ability to operate as an organization and to do the main things that we need to do, which is teaching and learning. And not that there are not many components or many different components to teaching and learning, because there definitely are. And we talked about a lot of that tonight, right? But we, and when I say we, I mean our staff. We are operating right now at maximum capacity. And so if we deviate to turn to the left or to the right, we will be dropping things, dropping the ball on major items that will have a very negative, damaging, harming effect on the organization. So sometimes, every now and then I get on a roller coaster that really actually scares me, like really scares me. And when it gets to that point, I kind of close my eyes and just say, I know that this ride will be over and I will be on the ground at some point. And when I'm back on the ground, I could do whatever I want to do. But right now, I really just have to focus on getting through this point in time. And that's where we are as an organization, is getting through this point in time. So we actually have a capable, viable organization to serve our children. And deep work is actually happening right now. And I don't want to give the implication to anyone that it's not, because it is. What we have been trying to do is to get staff out of these meetings so they could be ready and refreshed for the next day, so they could work on the things that they need to work on. Because we on this board, yes, we're important. And yes, we have thoughts and we have questions and things that need to get out. But the truth is, the staff Your main job is not to serve us. It's to serve these kids. And that means that we need to get you in here and get you out of here so you could go home and wake up fresh in the morning to serve these kids. And I don't want any of you to forget that that is what it's about. It's not about me. It's not about anybody sitting on this dais. It's about us pushing together in the same direction for the collective good, righteous work of serving these children. So until we get to the point where we are able to operate and do more, and it's not do more because you're not trying or because staff is not trying, just because we have more resources, just because we have more capacity. I sat and listened to Booker and Smith talk about us needing people. I sat and listened to Smith tell me she's the only one that's been in an department that's been around almost for a few years now. That's the truth. Being on the school board is not supposed to be sexy. This is not Congress. This is not the state legislature. This is supposed to be a boring job. People should not tune into school board meetings for entertainment. It is supposed to be a boring job. So, and I say that, I say it's supposed to be a boring job because it's kind of like the water district. You don't think about the water district as long as the toilet flushes. The toilet flushes, you don't think about it. You turn on the water hose comes on, you don't think about it. You don't think about it until there's something wrong. And that's kind of how we should be. In the idea that everything is working, everything is right. People don't come here and complain because it's working for them. But there's deep work that has to happen, and you guys need the space to be able to do it. And as long as I'm here, I will do everything that I can to make sure that you have the space to do it. One of the things that I want to say very quickly before I sign off is that we have been talking, Dr. Hurst has been talking about an equity audit. And I know some people don't think it's real, but it is real. He is leading an audit of our entire system to figure out and identify where the gaps are and to fill those gaps so we can be a better organization. What is happening is the equity audit results are starting to come in. Next week, on the 20th, we will have our first results from the equity audit, and that will be on the 20th, so Wednesday next week. We have not had a state of the school address in a few years, so I don't think that a lot of people really truly understand where we are. But we will. We will understand it, and we will understand it together as an organization. Everything that comes out is not going to be pretty, but we have to know what the problems are to fix them. And that's where we're starting. So on Wednesday, we will have the first part of the equity audit. We will be talking about business services and HR. And then after that, we will have other parts of it as well. So if you've been wanting to know what's going on, you are about to find out. And we are going to, because there are a lot of problems, and we're going to fix them. But we're going to fix them by working through our superintendent and working through our staff so we can really actually change this system, because the system needs to be changed. But we as board members are not going to change the system by sitting here talking all night. It's going to be changed through staff doing the hard work. So with that, I'm going to stop. And I've just announced the next board meeting. And we are adjourned at 10:10. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time.